wanted to introduce myself to the community and the board. My family and I just purchased the old Townsend chicken plant. So I just wanted to say hello so you guys knew who we were. We're really excited to come to Pittsboro. This is our second location in North Carolina. We are based in Knightdale right now. Let's see, so we're just excited to come and bring some jobs to the area and be a part of the growth of Chatham County. And I wanted to just ease everyone's concerns about another industrial site coming to the area. So part of our plan, the concrete plant will be towards the back of our lot. So you're not going to see most of the operation from the road. And mostly Monday through Friday, like daytime hours, which is really great for the community behind us. We're also bringing lots of jobs. We're going to hire at least 30 to 50 people in the first year that we're going to be open. I had a whole list of what I was going to say. We've already cleaned up the site quite a bit. We took all the overgrown shrubs down. We're cleaning up the building, making some modifications. So I just wanted to introduce myself and let everyone know that we're here to address any comments or concerns. And my personal number is on our website, CastleReadyMixedConcrete.com. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thanks.
The next speaker is Liz Collington.
That rather cheery note, I hope this doesn't come down. My name is Liz Collington, 390 Rocky Hills Road. I'd like to speak briefly, I hope, about the small area plan. The approved review procedure several years ago for a small area plan puts this board arguably in the process. So that procedure assumes that a small area plan would be for one, not 11 sections from the master plan, as the master plan requires, and would actually outline a planned, not hypothetical development. The size of the current plan also means it's hard to correlate features or systems mapped elsewhere for the whole with individual sections, and the individual sections have maps which are lacking many required features. Most importantly, though, absolutely nothing in the small area plan document apparently is to be binding on future development. To quote from page 1, the small area plans, such as this document, will serve as guides for development within their respective areas and express present intentions with respect to proposed development. They are not intended for specific development plans, but present development concepts, standards, and guidelines that may vary as actual development occurs, pursuant to specific site plans and subdivision plans approved by the town. Acreages and square footages, as well as projected numbers of dwelling units, are approximate and subject to the town's approval site subdivision plans. The provisions of this plan that are denominated guidelines are not intended to be rigidly applied, but serve as guides and suggestions for design professionals. The figures included in this and other small area plans are conceptual in nature. The illustrated guidelines and standards of the small area plan. The figures, however, are subject to modification, as well as the town's approval of subdivisions and site plans, and so it goes on. It's unclear if the tiny maps would be considered figures or drawings, but it hardly matters when Chatham Park states that it's all conceptual and that absolutely nothing is guaranteed to stay the same. What would this actually mean? The eventual approval of either this entire small area plan or sections of it would entitle Chatham Park to construct at a minimum permitted housing units and non-residential gross square feet, but the layout could change. Anything could change. The extraordinarily tiny lots could get larger and open space smaller. Open space could have to accommodate all the things that are not on these tiny maps, or the whole thing will be entirely different. I spent hours going over this plan, and I'm far from done. And I really hate the thought of the staff, the planning board, or anyone else spending that time if these section plans aren't the final small area plan for each section, even with the multiple problems this current effort presents. The uncertainty is also an indication that Chatham Park has included areas for which they don't yet have detailed plans, and which they therefore don't need to get started on right away, and not have a small area plan approved right away. You should feel empowered to hold for review of this plan, to avoid wasting the planning board's timeline rather than risk having to start discussing it on June 5th. And you should ask Chatham Park, what are you ready to start now? And have them submit small area plans for that section or sections that are more definitive. The town should even be considering something that isn't at least as binding on Chatham Park as it would be on the town, nor to be considering something which so blatantly violates the requirements of the master plan as to what a small area plan is intended to be. I should also point out that the small area plan approval process allows the technical review committee and the board to also include hiring an outside consultant who would work at the early technical review committee stage, which I believe Chatham Park would pay for. I hope you will do this when you get more detailed and more binding plans. Thank you.
Next speaker is Randy Bowler.
Good evening, Mayor Perry. Good to see you back. Let me make this very quick. At least twice in the last couple of days, I attended meetings where once Diana Hales, County Commissioner Vice Chair, was talking about transportation, and then Mayor Perry and I were at Robert Reeves' barbecue in Siler City and sitting with Larry Cheek, who's their board member, talking about transportation. And they mentioned that they weren't sure who Pittsburgh's rep was to the RPO board, which it used to be me as the mayor. I'm not sure who is the current rep. But they thought that that was something that maybe the board wanted to discuss because they had not. Diana Hales made a point of it at the meeting on Thursday. I bring it up tonight merely because this may be time if you want to discuss those meetings or the efficacy of that board to consider going to the Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's something we discussed many times in the past, but we would have only been one vote out of 16, the second vote being Chatham County, but we are an urbanizing area. They invited us before. Maybe we want to consider this. But this is something you may want to talk about, it's hard for you guys to spread yourself amongst these meetings and to get to all these things. So this is not an effort to come in here and cause problems. It's just to say that they twice was brought up, and they said, well, would you go to the board now? So I'm asking. Maybe it's something you want to talk about. Second is a follow-up on something we brought up a couple weeks ago, and Mayor Perry and I talked about. I think it would be really useful if this board would consider either doing a resolution or authorizing the mayor to sign a letter that goes to the county commissioners requesting them to move on the notion of expanding their board. If they're going to do it, they're going to have to pull together a committee, consider putting it on the ballot, if that's what the recommendation is. But the reason this board should be interested, as I said last time, we have had 0 members in the last 20 years from Siler City or Pittsburgh sitting on the county commissioners. A lot of the growth is happening in the corridor between us, Briar Chapel up to Chapel Hill, and these districts are going to continue to be out of balance unless we add members that are at large and not tied to a district. And as I mentioned the last time I was here, the last successful referendum was liquor by the drink, and Pittsburgh was the key player in kind of helping the county commissioners to put it on the ballot. And I think if they were to hear from you, it probably would make them feel better about moving and pulling together the committee. So if you have any questions on the transportation thing, I'm free to answer right now.
I had a question. Basically, we felt very left out at the last distribution of DOT funds. Do you think that there is a correlation between our representation on that board and the amount of money that we are being allocated by DOT?
Well, I don't know who's the actual voted representative for Chatham County for the municipalities. Maybe Michael could tell because he used to attend, or it might have been the rep. Do you know who the actual rep is for the municipalities in Chatham County, or is that kind of fallen by the wayside?
No, I think it was Larry. Yeah, it went over to Siler City. Yep.
Okay.
You got off the board, Larry. I had hoped to be that rep, but Larry had already filled that position. So I used to attend those meetings, but just got to be too much, so I couldn't do it. And I think Jeff Yeah.
I go to
Yeah.
He goes to what's called the RTC, TCC, which is essentially, there's RTAC and RTCs, which is essentially the staff side, Mayor. So that clarifies one question for you. If you're not a voting member of that board, so I was the voting member and the chair for almost 8 years, and they caucus in Chatham County between the 3 municipalities, and they elect who the voting member is. So if Larry became the voting member, who you talked to me yesterday, then he would be the one directed to try to get this done. And so you're not actually going to the meeting and voting on the executive board, although we technically would have a vote, but there's a bunch of other extraneous votes there too, which is why I bring up the point. This might be a good inflection point to consider going to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which has funding dedicated every year, and Chatham County has a hard time figuring out what qualifies as urbanized areas. So like they built that sidewalk on the north side of Chatham by Walmart years ago. We are a town. For us to find areas that you could build sidewalks and do things would be no problem. So we could work with Chatham, and Michael advised years ago for me not to push that because we were getting an awful lot of the RPO, but I don't know whether we will get an awful lot of the RPO anymore, and it might be time to join the MPO. And that's a decision this board will have to make with the staff.
You're welcome. Next on the agenda is mayor updates, and I am, as I told Randy, pleased to be back. I want to thank Pamela Baldwin for chairing the last 2 meetings and the work session very ably as Mayor Pro Tem, and I'm grateful that I have an operational left hip and an outlook which is absolutely wonderful. So I started back this past week with various mayoral duties, one of them being meeting with Brian Grusbeck and Renee Pascal, with the representatives from the Department of Environmental Natural Resources. She came to speak to us about economic development and infrastructure issues, and although basically we were giving her sort of a beginning tour of the lay of the land, already we have received word back from her about various issues, including the concern that we have about 1,4-dioxane in the public water system here in the Kansas town. So I know she's communicated with Brian and me on a couple of different questions, and it's just wonderful to have the kind of state municipal communication that she's going to provide from Nina. I also attended the VFW dedication on Saturday the 20th and a volunteer breakfast at the elementary school yesterday. Upcoming, I'll be speaking briefly at the Clean Tech Cluster on June the 1st, and a watershed meeting will be held here on the 25th of May, which I will now be able to attend. So, are there any other commissioner updates on fairgrounds or Triangle J or climate change?
I attended my first EDC meeting in your stead, so I'll do that until the end of the year or so. I was out of town for the last PBA meeting, so I don't have to report.
At Triangle J, I have another meeting Wednesday. I did distribute some information back at one of the previous meetings regarding the Triangle J. Then also I attended the Chatham County Affordable Housing Committee meeting, which the information, Mr. Bruce Beckett County placed that information in our packet, and it's very, very important that everybody review that information because there are some alternatives which are very, very interesting in working with affordable housing. I won't get into the specifics of it now, but I think that's something that we all should look at that along, because this was something that Triangle J, of course, presented, and the county was there, Dollar City was there, those the municipalities and some other individuals was there. And it may be a good idea if we could get Triangle J to actually come and talk to us about that here, what they presented, if that would be good to you all.
report from the County Climate Change Committee is they did not make quorum last week.
The next item on the agenda is a public hearing. Is there a motion to go into public hearing?
Second?
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Beth Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Motion carries. This is a slightly revised hotel incentive material that's being passed out here. And so Brian Grisbeck, what do we need to know about what you just passed out as compared to what we have in our package?
It's almost exactly the same. Nothing has materially been changed. I just thought I would give you something to follow along if you couldn't see the screen very well. But there is a slideshow that goes along with it, and this is a good time to start. The hotel incentives and commitments. You'll recall that, just as a little bit of background, we received a request from Eco Partners, who is proposing to develop a hotel and the 44 acres on the other side, just to north of Russet Run. They requested from the town consideration of financial incentives back on February 13th. You may also recall that they had been approved for financial incentives from Chatham County to help support the Ag Center back in November of 2016. We heard and discussed some possible incentives and commitments from staff on February 27th. And then after that, following that, we set a public hearing for tonight, May 22nd, 2017, following some input from the board. Again, some of this is familiar. The reported economic impacts that you might recall from the presentation from EDC. I was going to start talking there. So this information is from the EDC presentation back on February 13th, and you might recall that they are estimating 25 employees that would be paid an estimated $675,000 in total annual salaries. They would generate $3.3 million in sales. Our sales tax revenue, following distribution from the county, would be an estimated $3,200, and they're looking at $14 million spent in construction. And again, these are reported figures. Any incentives package should be followed up with commitments from the hotel operator, from the developer. And I listed out in the memo, I think, maybe 6, 7, 8 possible commitments. And those are here in both points in this slideshow as well. First one being that ECO, the hotel developer, would commit to hiring local employees and work with Chatham EDC to verify over the life of the term that it's making every effort to hire at least 12 full-time employees. Second, that ECO would work with Chatham EDC to use local contractors during the construction, and I guess I said maintenance, but we might also consider language that corresponds with the operation of the hotel. So in other words, that as much as possible, not only while it's being constructed, but while it's being maintained, that they use local contractors and hire local employees. Third, that it conform with the master plan and additional elements. I think that kind of goes without saying it's going to be part of Chatham Park, so we would assume that it would be complying with those, but I think formalizing it, certainly there's no harm in that. I could have probably separated out part of that third bullet that it should probably certify that it's working with local artists. I think that was some input that we had from the board a few months ago as well. We would also look to work with and Chatham EDC to market local businesses through the operation of the hotel and to advertise local businesses and events. Also, too, that ECO would make transportation available for guests from the hotel to the local businesses and to the events that might be taking place locally. ECO would participate in marketing of local businesses and attractions. And then also, too, that ECO work to provide verification that it's constructed the hotel in a manner that would conform to a LEED standard or to the general LEED standards that may or may not be LEED certification of it. There was a little bit of discussion from the board and with the developer on this issue. I think the developer is familiar with LEED standards and certainly is willing to commit to LEED standards. It sounds as if there may be a gap between the commitment to actually receiving the certification and constructing it to LEED standards. Whether they would commit to building it to LEED standards, it's unclear as to whether or not they would commit to actually applying for and receiving the LEED certification. So that's where kind of that issue sits at the moment. As far as the incentive levels, you'll recall from at the last time we discussed, I believe it was 3 incentive levels that would be different or apart from what the county had approved back in November. Now, the county approved what they considered their max incentive package. However, according to their plan, I can't see where it was a complete 100% match with what they would consider max incentive and what the project was actually producing as far as their point scale system. But nonetheless, what we would be looking at, based on some of the feedback, would be an incentive package that tries to recoup as much of or maintain as much of the ad valorem tax revenue as we possibly could. So in other words, don't give up so much of an incentive in the early years of the project, but yet make it fair for the developer. So we looked at three different examples. This first one here being year one incentive of 60%, meaning that we would essentially grant back to the developer 60% of the property taxes paid, which would leave us with a net revenue of for year one of $24,000 and change, and that would ramp down to an incentive level of 40%, meaning that we would be gaining more revenue over the lifetime of the 5-year term. So that was example one. Example two was more of a flat package that would be 50% from year one, year two, year three, year four, and year five. And that would mean that we would get incentivized a little bit over $30,000. We would receive a little bit over $30,000 in net tax revenue. So it would be really easy, I think, to know what we were getting in that package. We would be receiving, I think, a fair and equitable amount of value early, and certainly, obviously, over the lifetime of the term. And so that was example number two. And then example number three kind of went the other direction in that we would look at getting more of an incentive early on, which kind of doesn't really conform to what your preference, your stated discussed preferences were early, but would ramp up later, meaning that we would give up more. Actually, we would give up 40% and then incentivize more later on. So I guess it would more or less conform to what you were doing. And so we would have, as you can see from compared to year two, we would have $30,000 in year one compared to $36,000 in year one in example three. But we would obviously be responsible for more incentive as the life of the project went on. So from a staff perspective, I've heard a little bit of feedback from the board. I have a lean towards example number two as being pretty easy and fair and equitable from a financial and administrative standpoint. As I said before, we remain consistent over the 5 years, and we retain revenue in the early years while incentivizing the project. The next steps, if appropriate, would be to, I guess, first of all, obviously get any reaction you or anyone else might have regarding the concept of incentives and what we've been describing here over the last couple of months. And then if it's appropriate, you feel like this is the direction you want to head, and we have we're fairly confident in the commitments and in the incentives to develop a specific resolution that outlines preferred incentives and commitments specifically for a hotel development. And I think that's key in that we make sure that it's very clearly stated that this is something that we're interested in incentivizing for this reason, that there is, that we feel that there is a need for a hotel in the area, that we recognize that a brand hotel would be easier to attain with incentives, but that we want to make sure that we're getting a fair return as far as the commitments are concerned with marketing our local economy, using local contractors, and making sure the building is constructed in a sustainable manner. And so once we reviewed that resolution and you've got that tailored to your liking, then that resolution could also then direct the town manager and town attorney to develop an agreement that formalizes the incentives package. I believe that is in fact what the county, the stage that the county is at right now, and that they've literally defined their preferred incentives package, and now they're at the stage of developing the agreement. So I don't know that they've actually formalized that. With that, I would open it up for any questions, comments, concerns. This is a very fluid document. There's certainly more. This public hearing does not in any way encompass the final word on Sunday. There's more that can be done. As I indicated before, a public hearing is required before you could approve it. And that's certainly what this would do. There's nothing saying that you couldn't have another public hearing or a series of public hearings on it, so it shows. With that, I would open it up for any other comments or questions that you might have, or how you wish this corrected discussion.
Are there questions for Brian Brucebeck, or do you want to proceed hearing the people who signed up? All right. We have 4 persons signed up. Mr. Blair.
Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I have one question first, if I could ask that. How many rooms are we expecting this hotel to have?
Good question.
We're doing questions in public hearing. We do have the developers here this evening. If that's what
I was thinking 144 was what I read from it. No? We have the answer to the number of rooms. How touchdown? 116?
115.
115?
Okay. The reason I'm here tonight, my wife and I own 458 West Bed and Breakfast here in Pittsboro. One of the 3 lodging establishments actually in the town. Each of them is a very unique property. Each of them is in a historic house here in town. We're maintaining the charm and character of our town. And I realize that it's probably inevitable that we will have a hotel at some point, especially as Chatham Park builds out. I just want to speak against giving incentives for a hotel. I was not given any incentives to open up my lodging establishment, and to my knowledge, neither were either the other bed and breakfast here in town. If it's profitable for a business to come to town, they will come. My tax money doesn't need to be spent to pay them to come. And in addition to that, if the commissioners do decide that they feel like it's appropriate to give incentives to one lodging establishment, it seems like they should be given to all. Otherwise, it seems like a discriminatory policy and doesn't seem like something that we would want to do. But we employ 5 people. We have 5 rooms in our lodging establishment. They're talking about us employing 25 people with 115 rooms. So I don't know how if you wanted to make it equitable, how you might want to divide that up. I would love to get a 60% incentive back on my property taxes because they're quite high, as a matter of fact. I have an acre of commercial land. But I just feel like if you are going to do incentives, you should make it equitable. But I feel like if it's acceptable for a hotel to come, if it's good for their business, then we don't need to pay them to come. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Next signed up is Dave Clark. Is that with Lisa, or are those two separate?
I'm going to be separate.
Okay.
You don't want to talk with me?
She's talking to you enough.
So it's 20 years married. Thanks for hearing us. Small B&B Cafe in Pittsboro, again, another one of the lodging facilities that Yusuf was talking about. We have similar concerns. Moving into town, we took a fairly rough piece of property and have turned it around. We bring a lot of people to town to spend their money in our restaurant and at our bed and breakfast. And incentives is not the top of my list for things to be doing with the money from the town. If we want to do things with town money, let's beautify the town. There are some areas of town that could really use, $150,000, put some sidewalks in, put some street lights in, do some, upgrades and things. I agree with Houston. Nobody paid me to open my business. I did what I had to do, and we're doing quite well. If the town needs a hotel, it'll come. And I think those guys probably make fairly good money off of their hotels around the world. So, I just hope that you guys consider the small fish in the big pond here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Lisa? Sorry, I can't read your last name.
Piper.
Hi.
I wrote it, sorry.
Hi there, obviously I'm with Dave, but I have slightly different issues that I'd like to bring up. Obviously, small B&B, for any of those who don't know me, husband, wife. Going back a little ways, when we were in Minneapolis, we had a cafe in Minneapolis, and one of the things that was wonderful is Minneapolis wanted to keep the inner city as vibrant as possible and to help support local business owners, so they would provide incentives. Maybe not huge incentives, but incentives to help build and beautify older buildings, things like that, to keep small businesses active and to give them as much help as they could. As Dave said, we received absolutely nothing here, and it was almost to the point of being very frustrated and feeling a little rankled. But the other issue is that if there is money to spend, I have no problem with the hotel coming in. I think a hotel is needed. There's a lot of stuff going on in Pittsburgh, and there's going to be a lot more coming. But what exactly are we trying to incentivize? And in this point, trying to incentivize a chain hotel to come in is not really going to provide a whole lot of people wanting to come to Pittsburgh. It will be a functional building for sure, and it will make money. But when a building like ours and a cafe like ours is bringing people, half of our business is new every single weekend. We're pulling people from Greensboro, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Holly Springs. We're pulling people all over the community to come in to Pittsburgh to spend their money, and they do that because we've created a business that is vibrant. And if you do that with local independent business owners, and you give them help to do that, as we have done with the other B&Bs, they're interesting, attractive, fun things, and there are good reasons to come to Pittsburgh. A chain hotel is not going to bring people, but a vibrant, fun, interesting community would. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Hewitt?
Hello, you all. I'm Carol Hewitt. I live at 424 Johnny Brook Road in Pittsburgh. I'm going to read this because I don't remember what I want to share with you. Good evening. I run a small business. I'm a small business with my husband, and I run a local nonprofit that helps farmers and food business. I have to plug David and Lisa and just tell you that if you haven't eaten yet at the Small B&B Cafe, people do come from all over. And they'll stop by us, and they're from Maryland, and they're from all over, and they've heard about it, and they're coming to Pittsburgh. So I don't think Hampton is going to have that cachet. Anyway, I understand that EcoCP Partners has requested that Chatham County and the town of Pittsburgh develop incentives to attract a quality brand hotel, and that Chatham County has already approved a package for $337,000. Eco contends that their market studies indicate that current demand and high fixed overhead costs make a quality hotel a risky investment for the first few years, thus this request for incentive. While I can see the need for a hotel, Those of you that remember Mary Hayes' home, she tried very hard to get the Ramada and other places to come here, but they wouldn't because there was no liquor by the drink. And these hotels rely partly on bars. Anyway, so I realize there is a need. I have concerns about the incentives. So my concern is really just the incentives. As you know, we have 3 small inns, Rosemary House, 458 and Small. You've heard from 2 of them. These are owned by people who risked their savings. They moved here, they opened, and they now run these small businesses. I've spoken with several of them. They are only running at about 40 to 50% occupancy. Several of them have put themselves on the market. No one bought them, so they're now still here. It's like a boat. The first day you buy a B&B is the best day of your life, and the second best day is the day you sell it. These are not easy businesses to run, but these are local people. They give to our nonprofits. These are really wonderful institutions. And as Dave said, no one gave them any money to come here or has helped them in any way. If you're going to give incentives to an out-of-town multinational corporation, you should at least do the very same for them. Make these retroactive to the first several years that they ran their businesses here. A new hotel is going to be in direct competition with them. In the first few years, as that hotel gets going and as Chatham Park gets enough residences and so forth, it's going to hurt them. If they stay in business with a new motel in the area, that's going to be a real challenge. So we're giving an unfair and unnecessary advantage to a multinational corporation to put our own small businesses and our beloved friends and neighbors at risk. This is one of the fastest growing areas in the country. You know this. Before you assume that ECO's facts are correct, can we please at least investigate what other hotels are considering this area? Hilton just built a location at Southern Village in Chapel Hill. I doubt very much they got any incentives to do that. Have you seen it? It's just a big box on the left next to Southern Village. It's actually not very pretty. In this proposal, you cite the lack of quality rooms within 16 miles of downtown Pittsburgh. Why 16 miles? Starwood City is 17 miles away. So that means we're not looking at Country Hard in some of those hotels. And maybe they're not a grand hotel or something, but it's just interesting that we do have other businesses in the county that could carry some of the business for the Ag Center for now. Just so you know, we fill those up at Chicory with bands and things every year. They're struggling too. What you decide sets a precedent for future proposals. This development also proposes to add numerous restaurants, which will compete with our other locally owned restaurants, several of whom are already struggling to succeed. Will the restaurants ask for incentives as well? What else will you be asked to spend money on to help this development and developer? But let's just look at some numbers here. ECO, they report 25 employees. I won't quote it because it's from your proposal. Over $3 million in annual sales. With sales figures like those, they can certainly afford this investment. Again, this area is growing very quickly. They're well aware of that. Let's look at the numbers. The parent company to Hampton Inn is Hilton. Hilton is one of the largest hotel companies in the world. It's the 35th largest company of any kind in the United States. Part of their business model is to go into communities and get established ahead of their competition, knowing full well they'll lose money in the first few years and make it back and much more in subsequent years. They have 4,982 locations. Probably by now it's closer to 5,000 in 103 countries. Surely they did not get incentives to build all those, but they built them. Hilton's annual revenue last year was $11.3 billion. I'm sorry, I think they're trying to make fools of us. You know, we're a small town, and as the expression goes, they're going to laugh all the way to the bank. I think they're trying to take advantage of us by pressuring you to give away much-needed budget and funds from our small town by suggesting that they would not build here without these funds. That's pressure, that's ridiculous. So I urge you to simply say no. Like a teenager that asks for an unnecessary car on their 16th birthday. Unnecessary, it's unreasonable, and I really am certain this will not discourage them from building here in any way. They're coming. There are many needs in this town, local people that need your support, ways to make life better. I've watched you be careful and thoughtful at these meetings with the way you spend the hard-earned tax dollars of Pittsburgh citizens, giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to a hugely wealthy multinational corporation so they can make additional profits. Of course, those profits will go out of Pittsburgh, out of Chatham, out of North Carolina, actually. Doesn't match the integrity that I know you have in making decisions about our town. Please think about this carefully. It's okay to say no. This is a very important decision, and I just think warrants further research. I hope you listen to the other innkeepers and investigate other options before approving these thoroughly unnecessary incentives. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. The last speaker signed up, Liz Collison.
Do I need to give my address again? All right. I understand why some people would want a hotel in town. I actually rather expected there to be people who didn't know very much about the issue at all to come and say, yes, we want a hotel. Let's get a hotel. But anyway, it appears that those people didn't come. But I also accept that it's possible that the hotel franchisee, who is sitting in the row behind me, needs financial incentives to obtain financing, since this is a franchise and not like a Hilton-owned hotel. Needs financial incentives to obtain financing sooner rather than later. However, the issue is not a hotel. I assume the issue is not a hotel or no hotel, but that we've been told that it's just a question of whether the town should provide a rebate in order to get it built a few years sooner. The financial benefit to the town seems to me to be far less than to the county, which needs bookings for the agricultural center, which is why they granted the upfront, no strings attached, level 5 premium incentive package. As for sales tax revenue, I have to point out that the Economic Development Commission used the basis of a 70% average occupancy rate year-round, which strikes me as completely unlikely. I looked into what occupancy rate does a hotel need to stay afloat, and while it depends on the fixed cost, it's around 40%. The February presentation showed plans for a larger alternative downtown north of the bypass and North Pleasant Run, along with restaurants and other businesses that will be in direct competition with those downtown, whether among hotel guests or others, muting the benefit to existing businesses, but of course providing some additional sales tax. Thus, it seems important to find out from the franchisee whether the county incentive is in fact enough for the franchisee to get financing sooner, as EDC claimed the incentive here was also needed for. The main beneficiary I see to that area getting a hotel a few years sooner is to Chatham Park investors, because it would allow potential development customers to stay right in that area, inside or adjacent to the mixed-use area, such as developers of non-residential projects, home-building companies, future home buyers, company executives looking for office buildings, or just space in office buildings, and so on. So I was a little curious as to whether or not Chatham Park Investors was putting in some skin financially to get the hotel there sooner. That's the agenda. The county has an incentives policy that normally rates projects upon completion for incentive rebates with a scoring system that results in greater or lesser levels of 5-year incentives based on a point system, which I think the manager mentioned. Thus, conditions for any incentive, if you approve an incentive at some point in the future for this hotel, putting conditions on it is totally appropriate. The county's policy scores for the number of employees, how many level hires, employee benefits, the potential property tax base, whether it's an infill or redevelopment project gets more points, lead building or water saving features, etc. Also, relationship with local vendors, potential to attract other facilities, and so on. Since the town has no incentives policy currently, and I'm very concerned about the creation of a precedent. What's to stop Chatham Park coming back again and again with different projects asking for similar incentives? After all, just about everything to be built in Chatham Park is going to be built by somebody else who will presumably need financing. If you you do approve this in any form, I hope that you make it clear that this is a one-off until or if there is a formal policy. Any such policy would need to be narrowly tailored to projects that would actually need them, that don't compete with existing businesses that have received no such help, but complement them, and would be for infill or redevelopment projects, and to meet other goals such as local hiring, including during construction. Thus, if the town does approve any level of incentive for a hotel, it is more than appropriate level of incentive to be less than that approved by the county because the potential benefit is less, and that conditions be imposed as you have indicated you would want, especially since the county didn't require any. I would definitely support requiring LEED standards with certification for the hotel's design, along with a commitment to water-wise practices. This could help the hotel in its marketing and could also be a demonstration for potential developers of non-residential buildings in Chatham Park. As for the rebate structure, the 3 rebate structures that have been proposed, the rising amount of rebate with more in the later years makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. During the early years, with potentially fewer bookings, the hotel would benefit from lower fixed costs. And if I looked into this, and it's the fixed costs that really make that you can survive on a lower occupancy rate if you don't have really high fixed costs. So it would help in the early years if this is what you want to do. And if I were making that loan, that's what I would want to see, not the other way around. I also really like the flat rate approach if you're going to do this. There is a need for including local hires of contractors in the construction of not just the hotel, but all these Chatham Park projects. However, I believe that possibly the most this or any hotel franchisee could agree to would be that they would require local advertising of open positions with a construction firm or firms that they hire, and advertising the bid openings for contractors and subcontractors. However, could we also require that all these companies should be required to disclose to the franchisee and or ECHO, preferably this board before they get the money back. These companies don't have violations or significant ones of laws or regulations regarding, labor laws, worker safety laws, wage and hour laws, environmental regulations, and so on. Construction is among the most dangerous jobs and infamous for wage theft. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers who wish to speak who did not have an opportunity to sign up? Hearing none, is there a motion to come out of public hearing? So moved. Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Beth Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed. Motion carries. We're now at old business with items 1 and 2 out of the consent agenda. Michael, you have some concerns on the additional elements workshop minutes.
Yeah. And my question was whether I was comfortable calling these minutes because it really only included Commissioner Bonnett's printed comments. It did not include any of our extended conversation. So I didn't think it was appropriate to call the minutes. But if we were going to have a document suggesting that these were actual minutes of that, I'd like to see a more thorough representation of this kind of conversation. And I know it's there for audio, but a lot of folks aren't going to go to the audio. So that was my comment on that. So I would recommend that we have more thorough minutes represented in the document. Regarding the plug-in vehicles, I think we've covered this ground, but it seems like it's been some time, and I wanted to just confirm that we think that $20,000 will really be able to accommodate 4 stations. So I don't think so. You think they'll accommodate 2?
I think that the grant is for $5,000 per unit.
cost of First Station?
No, Mr. Bruceback is preparing to, or may have already has, set out an RFP. But with my new employment at the Clean Energy Technology Center, I might be able to get some comparables. There's a lot of wide variation, I can say. From what little I know, a charging station could be $100,000, or it could be a little over $5,000.
And the other question I had is, do we anticipate that we can actually get this accomplished by the end of the year? I think that's our deadline to get it installed in April.
Yeah, they're willing to work with all applicants on their timeline and schedule. If that's a condition of the agreement, I think it's something that they're flexible on.
I'm getting the same impression that Duke might actually be having a little bit of trouble with this particular program.
It's one that I think everyone is finding, based on some conversation on listserv, everyone's kind of finding that there are unique challenges with any kind of project that maybe people don't have as much experience with on a scale with some of the communities that are proposing. So, until we get the RFP out, under $20,000, my preference would be that if I had my druthers, it would be to kind of identify what the cost is for all of these stations that we proposed in this program, and then evaluate what they can do and what we want to do.
So this is just an agreement to enter into the program, but not necessarily participate.
That's right. I didn't hear the last.
Not necessarily participate. You may opt out and not construct it.
Well, until we've executed a contract with the actual providers to do the work, I think that's where the rubber starts meeting the road.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. This is not a commitment to do the project.
Yeah, we want Duke wants a commitment Duke wants a commitment on the conditions that they would reimburse costs for installation of the electrical charging stations. And I'm sorry, if that wasn't clear with preparatory materials, but that's what the intention of that document is.
Just sometimes I'm trying to confirm things.
Yeah, gotcha.
We need some motion as a result of this discussion.
You haven't answered that question, but I have one more observation I might offer, and that is that we have a level 3 charging station in our town that is no longer functional. Not a fast charging station. Plug into it, and in a very short period of time, your battery is fully charged. Maybe a cup of coffee, you can boil your way, as opposed to 20 minutes for a top off and 4 hours for a full charge from a level 2 station. That is an alpha install. It's on private property. The fact that equipment is defunct and the original manufacturer no longer is willing to serve it means it is not going to get fixed. And so I just wanted to bounce this idea. This is maybe harebrained, but I just wanted to see whether or not this board might have any druthers one way or the other about a concept, and that would be basically delineating a line around that site, having a lease on that site from town. Town will lease that charging station, so it would be under town's control. And then we remove level 3 charging station that doesn't work and plug in a level 2 charging station. I think it's going to be a lower cost project. I imagine you might be able to do it for 5 or less, maybe a little over 5. It is on private property, but the property owner has been in recent years, when it was working, keeping it open to the public when he was open, when his business was open, and not charging for the electricity. So it was essentially a public good that he was giving to the community. So.
And it does have a couple of food trucks that are often there, so in some ways it makes sense that I don't know where the station is in relation to the food trucks, if it's on the same side.
And by the way, it's also solar charged. He installed solar panels specifically to charge up those electric vehicles. So
when they're not open, they put chains across the...
They do, that's true. This is a bit of an outlier of an idea, but I just wanted to see if there was extreme reaction one way or the other from this board as a fourth or fifth option for Mr. Grusbeck to consider if any of the other locations or sites become unreasonable or unwieldy.
It seems like we have to have a contract.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, but I do think the lack of public access with the chains and whatnot is kind of an issue.
No transparency.
I think he opens it when he's got his food trucks there.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, the food trucks are there till late at night. I don't know how late, but the Mexican food truck is there pretty late.
And the coffee wagon's open very early.
So I mean, it is open a lot. You know, we get the food trucks at 8 o'clock at night. I don't know how much later it is. I think it's worth exploring. I mean, especially with that, because I'd be curious to know how much it would save us if it would be something that would be fairly easy to install. And then it's worth checking out the numbers and.
You do folks keep that an eye out, by the way.
As long as they were willing.
As long as we have legal control over the site.
This is ours of when we would often do something. Or when the food trucks are there. So if the food trucks aren't there, then people wouldn't really have a reason to come there to eat anyway.
So it sounds like we're open to hearing more information about it as an idea, but that would be one way down the list for Mr. Grusbeck to pursue it. If we had trouble with one of the other sites.
Well, I'll make a motion to have the manager enter into the reimbursement agreement for the plug-in vehicle charging station partners.
Second?
Moved by Michael Piotr, seconded by John Bond. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. And is there a motion to make the minutes more thorough with respect to the work session? Moved by Michael Piotr, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Our next item of business is the preliminary subdivision plat for Whispering Meadow, Victoria Taylor.
Okay, we have subdivision 2016-03. This is Whispering Meadows. Windstar Properties has submitted plans for preliminary plat approval. The proposed subdivision lies along NC Highway 87 bypass, approximately 21 miles west of the Sanford Road intersection. The proposal is to subdivide 14.23 acres into 33 lots. The lots average 15,159 square feet in size, which is greater than the minimum lot size of 15,000 square feet for the R15 district. Some of the lots are smaller than the minimum lot size for the zoning district because this is a cluster type development. Under the Pittsburgh zoning ordinance, minimum lot sizes may be reduced for single family cluster developments provided that the total number of lots does not exceed 2 dwelling units per acre or 3 dwelling units per acre without a curb and gutter system. And the built-upon area does not exceed 36% for projects without a curb and gutter street system. This development meets both requirements provided that the Town Board of Commissioners authorizes development without a curb and gutter system. Pittsburgh subdivision regulations require streets to be bordered by sidewalks on both sides. However, the developer is requesting an exemption based on the assertion that pedestrian traffic through this development warrants sidewalks on only one side of the street. Pittsboro subdivision regulations also require curb and gutter in residential subdivisions. Staff finds that the proposed plan is sufficient to handle drainage without a curb and gutter system. The developer is requesting an exemption from the curb and gutter requirement as well. Staff is recommending approval of the two requests and the preliminary plat. The subdivision ordinance requires that the planning board make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners regarding the exemption request for sidewalk bordering only one side of the street. They are not required to make a recommendation on the curb and gutter issue. The Pittsboro Planning Board reviewed this subdivision at their meeting on February 6, 2017, and in a vote of 5-0, the board recommended exemption from the sidewalk requirement and approval of the preliminary plat. So the Board of Commissioners will need to approve or deny the request for exemption from the requirement that streets to be bordered by sidewalks on both sides, and the requirement for curb and gutter in residential subdivisions, and then of course the preliminary plat. Any questions?
Other questions? Or, that's it. Questions from the board?
The request is for an exemption from sidewalks to not on both sides, but just one side.
Just one side.
Has the DOT reviewed this project? Sure, we're assuming there's going to be a driveway permit.
Yes, NCDOT has, sorry. My name is Samir Baho. I'm the engineer who designed the project. This project is probably about 5 years into the making, and it was expired because we couldn't start construction on it, and it came back again, and we started from the beginning. Now, a part of it was the finance was not in place to do it. We took the plans to NCDOT, and they have the bond. I think it's $50,000 for it. They're waiting for the city approval, for the town approval, so they can. The town then send them a letter saying they approved it, and they will issue the encroachment agreement.
What about the driveway permit?
Driveway permit with it too. Well, it is really a driveway permit because this street is down the street.
So the town's going to have to sign the driveway permit before you make.
Yes.
But you did that years ago.
Yes. And it came about 3 or 4 months ago. They needed the letter from the town, but when we asked the town to do us the letter, I said, well, the allocations are canceled. We have allocations for the water and sewer, and you have to start from the beginning, and this is what we did.
So you get, the town, if the project is approved, will sign a driveway permit. And I guess the engineer will do that, Royal. And then I guess you'll have to submit plans at that time to NCDOT for final.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they're gonna need updated plans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the plans are basically the same. We didn't change them.
Further questions? For the engineer or for Victoria?
So I'm curious about the sidewalk exemption request. and whether or not, what's the width of the sidewalk that's proposed, and which side would it be?
I believe it's on 5 feet and it's on the side.
East side? So it's a gray line of that's including like the grassy margin or
No, just concrete.
5 feet of concrete? Okay. And on exemption number 2, I'm embarrassed, I can't remember this. I think I was at that planning board meeting, but was there a planning board opinion on the soil type that's developing the suitability for use of shoulders and swales rather than curb and gutter?
I don't believe so.
I have a vague recollection that maybe a question was posed that Mr. Carl Schaefer wasn't present, and so the resident soil scientist being absent was just...
It's not something that they recommend on, so. Push for.
Yeah, that's of interest too, that I think we're trying to get away from curbs and gutters. But it is, I just don't know about that practice, and I'm just noting that our subdivision regulations call for determination that the soil type is appropriate for that method of drainage. And planning board mentions do we have any technical data on that? Perhaps from the applicant?
Soil type.
Joe, I'm not sure that drainage, requires a appropriate soil type. It can be reinforced, and it often is reinforced with matting or even stone. But there's not a soil scientist requirement to analyze the soil for permeability, so to speak, within a sewer application. So I'd be surprised if our ordinance. I don't recall seeing that.
I was just reading off of this Bayless memo. Next page, first paragraph, subdivision regulation 62C7. Second, third sentence down.
I don't believe you've had a residential subdivision in the last 30 years that's been consistent on curb and gutter.
Excessive approaches.
Because there is water on sewer, we don't usually do soil investigation for it because we don't need for the septic field or septic tank. And there is a general classification of it that the agricultural department usually issue that, and it is suitable for building roads. And we usually go with NCDOT, and they sort of mandate what type of pavement where to build. But soil investigation we usually don't do for this type of project unless we have, a heavy structure like a bridge or a culvert. Then we do specifically in those areas where the structure is going to be.
And it is interesting that it makes reference to the 1 acre parcel size, which is typically associated with well and septic. The other thing that I find interesting is clearly this project complies with this requirement because it says land consisting of soil types. And all the land consists of soil types.
That's fine.
qualifier in there.
If I may.
Sir.
Rick Murray, the developer, and the sidewalks on one side of the street and the curb and gutter, and the exemption of the curb and gutters is done for the environmental impact, which we know the town is very in favor of. This project was voted in favor unanimously by you folks in 2013. Everything that was voted on at that point is the same now, except that we've updated to meet all the requirements by the planning board. And just to clarify what Samir said about the encroachment of the driveway permit, NCDOT actually has plans that are only one step away from the same plans that you have. This was all done only just a few months ago. Thank you.
Well, I think the swales, make a lot of sense. I think the sidewalk on one side of the road on a project such as this makes a lot of sense. One of the concerns that I would have is that there's enough room to have the road to swale and the sidewalk fit within the right of way. That if not, easements be granted so that that sidewalk can be on the lots if need be. So I'm assuming as a town facility, in the road and sidewalk. And I think we've got other places in town where it's questioned as to whether or not the sidewalk is maintained by the town because it's out of the right of way but associated with roadway. And I think that we can avoid that mistake again or that condition again. We'll be that wrong.
Are there further questions? Or is there a motion?
Motion to approve with the exception of the block requested.
Moved by Michael Pinoza. Second by Pamela Walden. Is there further discussion? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have the Chatham Park Advisory Committee update. This is the third set of elements, and our discussion will be led by Jim Nance.
Madam Mayor and members of the commissioners, thank you tonight. This is the third set of four. So we reported to you and given you recommendations on the first 8. And tonight we'll be talking about public art, transit, public facilities, and affordable housing. In your package, you should have a paper that lists the recommendations by subject matter. And since we have 29 recommendations on this one, I thought having it that way and then using the slides as a way to everybody keep on the same page would be the way to go. One further suggestion before we begin, since there are so many recommendations on this set, is that as we complete each set, we might take a few moments and see if there are any questions or comments or discussion about those items before we move on, rather than trying to keep track of them until the very end. And of course, if they come up some other time, that's perfectly fine. So we begin with public art. As you can see, the first recommendation is to work with Chatham Park to develop the details of how and when the Chatham Park Public Art Advisory Board will be established and the parameters of how it will operate. In other words, we're asking that you work with them and actually put the details to this commission that they recommend in this additional element. Objective 3 in the additional element proposal includes the inclusion of the architectural focal points and requires that a public art statement be submitted to the Development Review Committee for non-residential buildings and site designs. What the committee is recommending that we ensure that this does not preclude the consideration of public art in residential site designs. For example, public art might well be considered as recreation and park sites planned as amenities in these residential areas. Just wanted to make sure that we weren't precluded from looking at public art in residential areas as well. The third is to encourage the inclusion of outdoor spaces and small area plans that can function for public performance art, such as music, dance, and theater, as well as the sculpture type of art and the design in buildings or structures kind of art. And then the next was that Chatham Park should involve the local artist organizations, including but not limited to the Artist Guild, the Arts Incubator, the Chatham Arts Council, and the establishment of the advisory board and the submission of the small area plans. That's a recommendation that we include the artist community, and I know they've been trying to do that. This gives a little more specificity to that issue. And then finally, in conjunction with that, the local members of the artist community should be included in the Chatham Park Public Art Advisory Board, again, included but not limited to the groups that I previously mentioned. So those are our recommendations on public art. Are there any questions or discussion on those?
Questions by the board?
Again, if you have some, and we move on, and we can get back to it as needed. All right. Move on then to transit. The first one is to ensure that the transportation impact analysis takes into consideration the additional traffic originating and destinating in Chatham Park on existing main roads such as 15501, Highway 64, and Highway 64 bypass. The idea is to make sure that the impact analysis doesn't just cover the territory that's included within Chatham Park, but the effect that the traffic originating and destinating to Chatham Park will have on these major roads. Secondly, that a long-range life of Chatham Park build-out vision of multimodal and alternative transit beyond the standard road, pedestrian, and bicycle within Chatham Park and originating or destinating in Chatham Park ought to be undertaken, and the town, Chatham Park, the county, NCDOT, and other transit entities should jointly participate in the development of this vision. What we're saying here, this is a 30-year project, and we ought to really now, at this time, join together and say, what's our vision? Not just for bicycles or pedestrian and trails and that sort of thing, but other kinds of transportation. What's the impact on air travel? This is going to be a 60,000 populated community at the end of this build-out, according to the projections we've seen. What about rail? What about light rail? All of these considerations, somebody needs to, we're recommending that you all sit down with Chatham Park, the county, and others, as we've said, and look at this long-range vision and try to build that so that as we move down the road 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 10 years, we can touch base with that vision plan and say, are we considering the right things? That's what this recommendation really is all about. And then further, transit design should incorporate the use of universal design to accommodate residents with diverse abilities. The Center for Universal Design at North Carolina State University has pioneered the development of universal design. And it goes beyond the Americans with Disability Act and takes into consideration people of various age groups, sizes, abilities, functional abilities, and their ability to use public facilities such as public transit. Places where you wait for the buses. There are things that you can do to make it easier for people with diverse abilities to go in there. And applying these principles of universal design as outlined in the North Carolina State University is not designed to particularly add cost to the project, but to take into consideration things from a design perspective that might otherwise be forgotten. And we've provided reference to the Center for Universal Design. And interestingly enough, the head of that Universal Design project, NC State University, is really the father of universal design. And it's being implemented across the world in major cities. So there's that piece. Next, transit design should not create isolated pockets or communities between Chatham Park and the rest of Pittsburgh, pedestrian and public transit. The town of Pittsburgh and NCDOT should strive to incorporate similar pedestrian and bicycle principles throughout Pittsburgh. And then next, during the development phase of two-lane roadways, bicycle and multi-use paths should be incorporated to provide safe access between residential and commercial locations. This came up because in the neighborhoods, in the residential neighborhoods, in the presentation we received from Chatham Park, the thought was that in these roads going through there, that, well, they wouldn't really need a bicycle path or that sort of thing because the traffic wouldn't be large enough and so on. And what we're saying is we'd like you to rethink that and say that we make those provisions at the outset, because we've all seen, everybody on our committee, and I think you as well, it becomes very difficult to retrofit these roadways once they're built, and a lot easier to build this planning into the process at the very beginning. So that's what this recommendation is all about. And then finally, the town should ask Chatham Park for an estimate of the jobs that may be created within Chatham Park and the types of companies to be recruited and the potential number of retail businesses. If there are few jobs opportunities expected in Chatham Park, there will be continuing adverse impacts on existing roads. What's meant by this is how many of these people that are living in Chatham Park are going to work in Chatham Park and how many aren't. And if the percentage is very high that aren't, then that's an additional impact to be considered when we're doing our transportation impact analysis. So that's what the whole idea behind that particular recommendation is. So are there any questions or comments on
they're very good recommendations, and one of the things that I've experienced recently was a very successful system where the multi-modes of transportation were integrated together, and oftentimes at intersections where there was the opportunity for an automobile and a person to be in conflict, it was solved by having grade-separated intersections, so that either the pedestrian went under the road or over the road. And I've just experienced a very successful system. So I think we can incorporate that into Pittsboro in general.
Yes.
It'll be very helpful.
Right.
He does a great job with that. I noticed there were trails that connected the park, and it's very accessible to people with wheelchairs. These trails with bridges and very pleasant trails and very park along the way.
Okay. Next, I like the idea of looking out for the alternative transit, such as light rail in the future. There's a plan for that because, of course, you know that's what Charlotte is doing now.
Right.
They're implementing it, so which was a hard task.
Yes.
But they are doing it.
It is. I know I'm very familiar with the area up in Northern Virginia because I have family living there, and they are extending right now the light rail system out to Dulles Airport and then out beyond. And I can tell you that 20 years ago, if you'd asked someone if that was ever going to happen, they would have probably said no. But some planners looked at that, and when they built the toll road, they said this median is going to be saved for the extension of light rail out this way, because that's going to happen someday. Without that planning, you would have either had to completely rearrange how you were going to do it, or it would have cost additional money. So there's some opportunities if people are willing to sit down and really think about vision plans without committing that the exact specifics are really going to happen.
It seems like a lot of the transit now is starting to go underground, so they're particularly big.
Yeah.
You know, I was in Chicago this past weekend. This is not a new concept, but it's really great. All over Chicago, they have the bicycle rack where you pay $10 and you take a bike and you can leave it at any of the other sites along the way. And I'd like to see that for tourism road. I think there are some cities that are also doing that with cars.
Yes, that's true.
You have to own a car. I like the idea of that also.
Anything else on here? Okay, public facilities then. The first one is the town. Wait a minute, I want to make sure I got the first one correct. Yep, I'm fine. The town and Chatham Park should explore creative options for handling waste management within Chatham Park, and then phase to include all of Pittsboro. A creative solution ought to be incentive-based, with the goal of significantly reducing the amount of waste going into landfills and increasing the amount of waste being recycled while reducing the cost for the town and most customers and significantly reducing the need for more landfills. The whole idea is here is if we can figure out a way to handle our waste management in such a way that we incentivize recycling of all types, and so that you pay not as a utility, not as a fixed fee, but as a utility, the amount of waste that you generate that's going into a landfill to determine how much you pay for trash pickup. And if you are able to if you recycle more, you'll be paying less. This is being successfully implemented in some other locations, some in Florida, some up in the Northeast. Sometimes it's through a bag system where the trash bags are purchased in local stores, and the cost of picking up your trash is included in the cost of that trash bag. And so, depending on how many of those trash bags you use, depends on how much you're going to pay for trash. The other either bin or bag that you might use for recyclables is free. It doesn't cost you anything like that. And so, the whole idea is to see if we can't take this opportunity to do something different in waste management besides building more landfills. And we think there's some opportunities here to do this. I had the opportunity to meet with some folks that are doing this kind of work, and I think it has great potential. Now, that second recommendation that we make in this regard is that the town needs to devise a way to ensure that there's not double taxation for Chatham Park residents and businesses during the waste management phasing period, and devise a methodology to provide support systems for low-income residents. And what we're saying here is if Chatham Park were to agree to be kind of the beginning point, since there is no trash collection now in most of what will be Chatham Park, and this, so it won't be like changing over from a system. But while that phasing period is being implemented, we want to make sure that the residents in Chatham Park weren't paying for these trash bags or bins or however you all decide you might want to proceed, and included in their taxes for trash pickup as a part of the town of Pittsburgh. And then later on, if it gets expanded into the rest of Pittsburgh after, I think, what would be a very successful test time in Chatham Park, that obviously would take care of itself. But the committee felt that for purposes of using Chatham Park as a place to start, those people that live there ought not to be penalized in that regard. So that was our recommendation on trying to come up with some ways to handle waste management in this very large development that's new and creates less landfill usage. Further, we said that the town should begin discussing these options with Chatham Park and other stakeholders as soon as possible. And then we make another recommendation that's similar in some ways. The town of Chatham Park should begin discussions with the United States Postal Service to establish mail collection delivery for Chatham Park and the rest of Pittsburgh. If the centralized delivery mode is to be used, locations should be identified in the small area plans. And here, the town of Pittsburgh, because of its size and its rural nature over the years, is serviced by rural delivery, as you know. And Chatham Park is going to be a different kind of development, and Postal Service is obviously going to want centralized delivery at some point. We believe that those discussions ought to be now, and that we ought to identify where these locations for these centralized mailbox locations ought to be identified as part of the plans as they're submitted to the town for approval. And we ought to take this opportunity, further recommending to the board to take this opportunity to begin to include the Postal Service in your discussions about the future of Pittsburgh and the surrounding area and what that means for the Postal Service in terms of facilities and deliveries. And as we grow, there's no reason in the world why our businesses downtown ought not to be receiving some kind of delivery. That might have been a perfectly reasonable proposition many years ago, but simply isn't anymore. And so if we're going to have Postal Service as a partner in this proposition over the years, they ought to be included now. And I think they ought to be invited to participate along with Chatham Park and with this board, not only with what's going to go on Chatham Park, but the rest of Pittsburgh.
And you and I spoke to the postmaster some years ago.
We did indeed.
Who was receptive to the idea of centralized delivery even
in downtown. Yes. Unfortunately, she left.
Well, and also we couldn't get the business owners to agree that they would pay the cost of establishing a kiosk and get their mail. So it never happened.
And I suspect as time moves, as time goes on, as Chatham Park develops, the whole nature of facilities, this facility that we have off the road here is not going to be the facility that's going to be required in another 10, 15, 20 years. And I know that the lead time on real estate transactions for that organization are rather long, and one ought to be thinking about that now. If you think about the number of people that we're talking about, Greensboro-ish, and I know there's a major mail facility where most of the mail from Pittsburgh goes through already, and there must be at least 5, maybe 7 stations there. So anyway, something to begin thinking about now, our committee thinks. And in Objective 7 of the additional elements in public facilities proposal, there is a statement that says that the town will exercise the power of eminent domain. Our committee believes that should be changed to the town may exercise the power of eminent domain. We don't think you ought to enter into an agreement that requires you to use eminent domain no matter what the circumstances are of that particular request. I think you ought to reserve it to yourself to make that decision on a case-by-case basis. And finally, we said the additional element states that Chatham Park will reserve up to 11 sites for schools. As the gentleman, a representative from Chatham County Schools that attended a couple of our meetings, pointed out Chatham Park is considering Thales Academy to count for 3 of those sites since they will have K through 12. 8 other sites simply might not be enough. We think you ought to ask the Chatham Park why there is a limit to only 11 and why there is no minimum number of sites, only a maximum. In other words, we feel comfortable in discussions and the information that we got from the representative from Chatham County Schools that they're working closely with Chatham Park. I think we're recommending that you all stay on top of whether or not anything additional is needed, particularly bothersome with the idea that if you have a school like Thales that's going to be counted as 3 sites because they're handling grade groups from K through 12 is a little bit disturbing in terms of what we thought the future, and ask that you be careful about that. And then finally, we suggest we require a report of water analysis post-reclamation treatment as proposed by Chatham Park and the listing of the types of tests. And this is the water that Chatham Park is proposing they're going to be able to reuse for, not for drinking, but for other purposes. And we assume that there's going to be tests required about, the quality of that water, what's actually going into the soil, what's going into the areas. And we think we ought to know what those tests are, and then you ought to ask as time goes on what those results are. So that was our public facilities. Yep.
Mr. Knopf, that last item, requiring a report of water analysis, is that pre-development or on some recurring basis?
Recurring basis is what we were thinking, is that if they're going to reclaim this water and use it for irrigation purposes, or as we saw in some of the films in terms of water fountains, that sort of thing, there ought to be tests. We're assuming there will be, but we ought to require that there be tests as to what that quality, what's in that water, what goes in that. And then I don't know what those tests are.
The state of North Carolina is going to require daily reporting.
Well, it seems like there needs to be a baseline established too at the very beginning, so that we can follow changes in water quality.
Okay.
And I'd like to go off for a moment on 1, 2, and 3. So just be clear that this waste then we're talking about solid waste or garbage or recycling.
Yes.
And then
that's including stuff for composting.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I think textiles were also discussed.
Textiles can be a part of this, and it actually turns out to be a good part of it because you can actually make money off of it, it turns out. I mean, if you're doing a good textile recovery program, you can actually, there's some value to it. And I found out, much to my surprise, that stuff is bailed up and shipped in container ships overseas and has been used in places that turn it into things they can sell.
And I also want to linger for a moment on the idea, the beauty of the idea that we ought to have a creative solution that provides incentive for reducing one's waste.
Yeah. We looked at that. We saw, again, with the number of people and the population we looked at and the area we're in, and we got to thinking, how many landfills are going to be needed over the next 30 years to accommodate the trash? And there ought to be a way to do that better.
And in a brand new community, I think it makes an awful lot of sense that as people arrive to the Chatham Park sections of the town of Pittsboro, that they encounter a new way of dealing with garbage and reducing their waste.
And I forgot to point out, too, that thanks to former Mayor Bowler, I was able to attend a session with the county chair, commission chair, and a representative from Chatham Park to talk in general about these kinds of things. And I believe we got the understanding that they were certainly amenable, provided that there was some provision for not double taxation in Chatham Park or we call it double taxation, it's double payment for trash pickup during this basic period.
So, long time ago when I was fresh out of college, I was privileged to work as a recycling coordinator. And I was then put in charge of the entire solid waste stream for that community of 13,000 people. And at that time, this was called as pay as you throw. And so back to Mr. Nass's idea that we pay for it as a utility rather than as a flat fee. You can throw away as much or as little as you want. Your next door neighbor could put a whole dumpster's worth out on the street. You just put a bag and you're both paying the same amount. We ought to pay for what we generate. We ought to pay for the garbage that we're creating. And we ought to be incentivized by not having to pay to recycle. So I love the idea. I think it's a great idea. And
anything else on public facilities? All right. Affordable housing. We want to start out with this, the committee's vision of affordable housing. And what we say is the vision for Chatham Park should be one of an inclusive place to live with integrated multi-income housing that is affordable to the full range of typical Pittsboro and Chatham County residents. Anyone who works within Chatham Park, including those at the lower end of the pay scale, should be able to find housing within Chatham Park that they can afford, including affordable rentals. Chatham Park should not be an enclave with much of the workforce having to commute to their jobs. And then our first recommendation beyond the vision statement is that we recommend you reject the affordable housing additional law proposed by Chatham Park as being inadequate. Then we recommend that Chatham Park obtain professional affordable housing assistance and resubmit the affordable housing additional element that includes provisions for workforce housing, low-income housing, and long-term affordability at a minimum. In the presentation that we were given by Chatham Park, it was actually said that look, we don't have a lot of experience at this. We're land people. We're trying to put something together here as best we can, but we don't have the tools. Well, they certainly have the capability of finding people that are experts in this field, and we think that's what they want to do, and you ought to require them to do that. Then we go on to say, however, that unless the revised affordable housing additional element can be completed, submitted, and approved by the time the small area plan or plans for North Village are submitted, Chatham Park should plan for a minimum of 10% of the residential units in North Village could be affordable housing units, including workforce housing and low-income housing, or pay an in lieu of fee of $85,000 per affordable housing unit not built. And the committee's included an affordable housing definitions at the end of this report as to exactly what we talk about as low-income housing and workforce housing. Then we say location of affordable housing units close to job sites could potentially be used as a qualifier for any incentives developed by the town. The town, we believe, must begin the process of establishing an affordable housing program for all of Pittsboro and identify an ongoing and defined source of revenue to support that program, and plan on establishing a nonprofit entity to manage the affordable housing program for Pittsboro, including Chatham Park. And then we say that while this may be beyond our charter, we recommend that Chatham County also begin the process of establishing an affordable housing program, and that the town of Pittsboro, Chatham County, and Chatham Park work together to create a consistent affordable housing program with a defined source of revenue to support it for the town and the county. And then we finally say affordable housing programs that are developed should incorporate universal design principles to accommodate residents with diverse abilities, going back to the universal design thing that we talked about before. And then at the end of that, we have affordable housing with definitions of what affordable housing is, what low-income household is, what workforce housing is, and so on. And so those are our recommendations on affordable housing.
And Mr. Noss, these definitions are helpful. I'm curious about the source of the
UNC School of Government. Very good. And I also was instructed by the committee to say to you folks that they greatly appreciate you designating affordable housing as a top priority in the workshop that you recently had. But to remind you that we expect you to actually go ahead and do some things in affordable housing this year.
Jim, on so defining affordable housing in this document is affordable housing shall use for housing for households who make 8% or less than area median income. And a low income household is someone who does not exceed that 80%.
Right.
But we've also got some other, like very low income, severely cost burden households.
Yes.
But do you have any recommendations? I think you're saying that affordable housing goal is the 80% for low income housing.
Right.
But not addressing anybody that qualifies that meets the requirements of a very low income, severely cost burden household.
Well, particularly in the, I guess that's so in terms of that provision that we put in as a stopgap in case the redefined additional element couldn't be submitted on time. And we thought we would go with very low and workforce housing in that regard. And I might also point out the committee was unanimous in suggesting that we not try to solve the affordable housing program on the backs of Chatham Park, that we have our own work to do in terms of Pittsboro, but the Chatham Park needs to play an integral and very important role in affordable housing, but that we're not solving the whole problem within Chatham Park. And so our committee felt that concentrating within Chatham Park on low income and workforce housing was the right way to go. Now, some people may argue that there ought to be some provisions in there for very low as well.
Well, I'm encouraged also to hear that the counties have a willingness to participate. So I really think that's part of the solution as well.
And then also in addition to that, concerning affordable housing, you're talking about, as I said, we all meet as a committee.
Right.
We talk about rentals right now.
Right.
We're focusing mostly on that, but it can go over to to homes that you can purchase.
Right.
So we are working currently with all of the municipalities and the county to different options. So, and that is very good in reference to what we can do to not just focus on Chatham Park,
Right.
but we're looking at the whole county.
Yeah. And we think, the committee does also think of long-term affordability, particularly when you're talking about purchased homes, is a key component, and there's different ways to do that. Chapel Hill, essentially, it's a 9-year ground lease, I believe, and so program that they kind of use. There's some other areas where we've looked at where, in order to maintain long-term affordability, if you sell your house and you bought it for $105,000 and you're trying to sell it for $140,000, you're not allowed to keep that difference between the 105 and the 140. You may be allowed to keep some percentage of it, but not the whole banana, to try to keep that housing rolling. And those kind of proposals, if they were to be adopted, can be adjusted as time goes along. You might start out and say you can keep 10% of it and then find that as you're moving with it. But I think it's key in talking to everyone that you seriously consider an entity to manage this. For the town of Pittsboro, and if it gets to the county, I don't think you can expect current staff to take that on as an additional role, and I don't think you can expect Chatham Park as an entity to say we'll manage affordable housing. I think it's legitimate to believe that some group is going to do that. The research that the committee did indicates that the more successful affordable housing programs are run by a appointed non-profit group, and that they set the standards, they manage it, they do all the work environment, they set the program in motion, and the identified sustainable source of funds is also, we think, in a very important situation. One of the things, and we can, kind of hard on Chatham Park in this particular element, but I think they kind of expected it's not adequate. But there were some creative things in there in terms of some of their small house ideas that they had, particularly for senior affordable housing. And the fund that they were talking about setting up ought not to be completely dismissed. There may be a way to deal with that differently than was proposed in the document itself, provide some of the funding source. Okay. Anything else on board? And then we have one final recommendation at the end, and this came up and we didn't know where to put it. And we thought, well, it couldn't go in public facilities, and then we said, no, let's just make it a general recommendation. And this is an idea that former Mayor Buller talked to us about, and the committee adopted it almost immediately and worked on putting the wordings together on that. And we said we recommend that the town and Chatham Park work together to create a naming commission for the naming of places and streets to reflect the cultural and historic heritage of Chatham County and the town of Pittsboro. And the idea there is there's a perfect opportunity here to have this commission take this step to even further integrate the Chatham Park and the rest of Pittsboro and the rest of Chatham County. I could see, for example, that George Moses Horton Avenue in one of the main streets in Chatham Park. And if we got the right kind of people on this commission from this historical society and residents that really understand the cultural and heritage of this county, we could do some things naming-wise that have some substance to it. And developers like to do their cousins and aunts and their uncles and their friends, but there's certainly opportunities for park names and for main roads and that sort of thing to do some naming. And we're thinking that as long as we're talking about a naming commission, you all ought to do that for the town of Pittsboro, for the future developments that aren't Chatham Park, so that things are getting named with some thought about the area that we live and the culture that's here and that sort of thing. So that's what that recommendation is about. Anything on that?
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I just want to, before I go, say a couple of things. One, I want to thank very much the county staff for all the support they gave us. Jeff was just absolutely super, and Brian, in making sure we had the materials we needed, making copies of things, and so on. And then secondly, to tell you, the people you appointed to this committee were absolutely outstanding. They did the work, they read the documents, they did research on their own. They were a great group to work with, and I enjoyed it very much. And also on behalf of them, I want to thank you all for your support as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Earlier in the week, Jerry Wharton asked me if he might have an opportunity to speak on affordable housing. I don't know if the board wants to hear that now. There is an additional agenda item regarding affordable housing brought on by Mr. Bonnet. But Jerry, no?
No, I'd rather hear what John has to say.
I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Well, then I will.
Okay.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the commissioners for allowing me to speak. I want to thank the group that worked so hard on all of this information. It's great information. The important message that I wanted to send from Chatham Habitat is that this thing for a long time has looked like it's a we against them thing. It's Pittsboro against Chatham Park, or it's this group against Chatham Park, or it's really not a we against them thing. It's what can make Pittsboro better moving forward. And if it's made better moving forward for one group, then it's made better moving forward for every group. Chatham Habitat has had a lot to say about affordable housing and how we think affordable housing could be done, should be done. And there again, it wasn't a we against them thing. It's what can make Pittsboro better. How can Chatham Park, along with everybody else, be made better moving forward? And I was accused a couple of times of coming up with documents that was going to further Chatham Habitat's ability to work in the system. And we enjoy what we do. I think we're good at what we do, but we are way behind at what we do. And Chatham Habitat is not going to solve this problem. What's going to solve this problem is if Pittsboro becomes is seen as a more affordable housing friendly town. If Pittsboro is seen as a more affordable housing town, then Pittsboro is going to attract 2 or 3 or 4 other agencies that can come in, and with 3 or 4 other agencies besides Habitat, we can start to make inroads. I think with the work that was done by this committee, this is our last best chance to really make an impact that's really going to get us where we want to be, that's really going to make Pittsboro looked at as affordable housing friendly, that's going to attract some of the other organizations that they referred to that might come in and help to manage this problem or this opportunity. So I think everything's moving in the right direction. I think that being at Chatham Habitat right now is an exciting time, but we're 10, 15 years behind where we need to be. That's nobody's fault in this room, but it's time to catch up. It's time to get us 10 or 15 years further along in a very short time. I think that Chatham Park can certainly be part of that solution. I think that the town can be part of that solution. Habitat's happy to be whatever part of that solution we can be, but we've got to get there. And if we don't take the steps now, it's going to pass us by, and we never will get to where we need to be. So I appreciate the efforts. I appreciate Chatham Park being here to listen to this. I appreciate the committee. You guys are doing a great job in getting us where we need to be, but we just don't have many more chances to really start to get there. And so I strongly urge everybody working together to make the right decisions to get Pittsboro to where everybody wants Pittsboro to be. And I just left a board meeting, a to have full business come here, and that's pretty much the message that I wanted to bring to this group, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Jerry, I have one question for you.
Yes, sir.
We heard from the committee the recommendation that housing needs to be 80% AMI. What percentage of AMI is your clientele?
Our clientele is 25 to 60%. So there's a lot of work to be done, but if we start moving in that direction, if somebody else is meeting that 8%, then other agencies can work on moving down the line and working with the 25, 30, 35%. It's just got to move in that direction. As it starts to move in that direction, then everybody will be able to catch up a little bit. I think that the most important thing that was said was to look at a designated funding source for affordable housing. That's where it's done the best. You look at Raleigh, they've got a solution. Chapel Hill has a solution. Briar Chapel has been part of the solution around the county and here in Pittsboro. But the designated funding source is where you really start to make inroads, and that's got to be contoured for whoever's using it. So I encourage everybody in this room to look at what is a good designated funding source for affordable housing for Pittsboro moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Our next agenda item is Chatham Park additional elements. Jeff Jones is going to lead us in the discussion of the first three.
Evening. Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. Talked about the last set of elements with the committee's recommendations, and if we remember back in December, they gave you their recommendations on these sets of elements, which includes phasing, signage, lighting, parking, and loading. Since that time, we've had a public hearing. We've had two public hearings, one on December 12th, and then again on March 27th. After the meeting on the 24th of April, the board requested a workshop, and most of the members were able to attend that workshop, and we had some additional comments that came up either at the workshop or at various meetings leading up to the workshop. Chatham Park has responded to comments received, and they are included in revised elements that were included in your packets, both the marked up version, the track change version, and the clean copy version. Additionally, they gave written responses to all of the comments received, and there may have been some things that did not necessarily produce change in the element. And I think that's where you all may start your conversation with Chatham Park tonight. The applicant is here and staff is here, but I would really think that it's Chatham Park to respond to any comments that you may have, questions that you may have with these particular elements. If and when you get to a point of consideration to move forward with a particular element, staff has included a separate resolution for each individual element so that we may not bog down one that you might be ready to move forward with something that we need to go back and tweak a little bit. If we get to that point, we can certainly talk about that and kind of lead through that discussion. But I would open it up for questions from the board and have maybe Chatham Park come up and kind of give you an overview of the comments that they received since the April 24th meeting, and then kind of give you some guidance on where they were thinking and some things that they agreed to change.
That's a good way to work it for you. Yeah.
All right.
Chuck, you want to give an overview? Chuck, we'll just give an overview of the responses that you had. I think it was before.
Okay. So, Chuck Smith, Chatham Park. Everyone has had an opportunity to read the responses? No?
Well, I'll say we I think I just did a package on Friday. I personally work all weekend, so it's definitely the fast packet this weekend. It's been difficult to have time to go through everything. Just put that out there. And yeah, but I would like to see what's going on.
I've begun to skim them and have not gotten through.
So, I guess I should go through them one by one, read them, and give our response. Is that what you're looking for?
I mean, I've definitely read all of them. But, I mean, I was supposed to board anything this, but as far as spending in-depth amount of time, I'm definitely focused on that.
Well, I'll express some frustration on that. I think we've been here on 3 or 4 occasions only to say that we're not prepared. We haven't had time. And I think it's a real disservice to the community if we cannot process the information and make decisions.
A lot of new information is happening. So it's not like we're looking at the same document over and over.
Well, I think we are. I mean, I've got 3 or 4 different versions of something called a development phasing plan that I've reviewed and made comments, and I've found that they have responded to specific comments, and if we're unable to provide them with specific comments, there's no way for them to address them, and we can't just sit here and not. It's unfair to every citizen for this board not to make decisions in a timely fashion. The gentleman came in tonight and asked for a subdivision approval, and we didn't say that we didn't have time to review that project, or we didn't make time to review that project. We've got to be able to do this for the community's sake, for the applicant's sake, for the community's sake.
I don't think anyone questions it when I'm trying to push forward. That's not an issue. We have to make sure it's done correctly. It's going to be a document that we use for many, many years to come. It's important that we get it right.
Absolutely, but if we do not provide the guidance, the leadership, and the feedback to make it that right, correct document, we're flailing in the way.
Well, feedback has been offered from a variety of sources and has not been integrated. But I think that we may be a little bit premature here. I have a question for our town attorney, Mr. Messick. Given that substantive changes have been made to the drafts, are they required to go back to public hearing?
No, sir. It's not a zoning or amendment. These are resolutions. These are not ordinances. It is not an ordinance. If you choose to have a public hearing, you may, but you're not required to.
Well, I hear your very strong concerns, Mr. Fiocco, Commissioner Fiocco, and I similarly think that it's not fair to citizens to ask that substantial documents which will live for decades, presumably, as guidance for the development of the better part of our town, not be given very, very thorough consideration and very thorough deliberation. And there are substantive changes that I received on Friday morning. And I too have a very busy life, and I tried very diligently, and I've managed to accomplish a skim, but I have not been able to go back to concerns that I suspect have not been addressed to the satisfaction of the commenter or to myself. So,
Well, how do you suggest we move forward?
well, I said before, I think we need help. We need outside help with this. And I have not said that I agree. I've said it emphatically. And just in compiling the feedback, the comments, and having a way to objectively address whether or not they've been incorporated, that would be a big help. And development phasing, signage, lighting, parking and loading may not be the most substantive items, but I think a process for addressing concerns about the more substantive additional elements is needed. A process that incorporates professional assistance that gives any member of the public a confidence that each and every comment submission was addressed in meaningful ways rather than dismissive ways.
Okay, let me ask this. I'm going to ask Mr. Jones, are you receiving comments? Because if you keep saying we're getting these comments that aren't being addressed, I need to know, are they going to you and you're not addressing them?
If I get them, they get sent to Chatham Park, to the planning board, to you all, to the committee. I have never withheld a comment.
Okay, so who's
I agree.
So who's not being
But well, Commissioner Ballman, let me ask you, can you say with confidence that everything you received in your inbox has been addressed in Chatham Park's response?
I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the concerns that you're saying here about comments which are not being addressed. So my only way to know what comments are not being addressed is to ask Mr. Jones if he's received them, or Mr. Bruceback, have you received them? I need to know what these comments are that are not being addressed so that we can get those addressed, so we can get Chatham Park to answer those definitively.
I agree.
So can you give me who those are coming from, or who are they directed to?
Sure.
So then we can give them to Mr. Jones and Mr. Bruceback, so we can get those resolved.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What do you all think?
Well, we've gone through a process.
I just don't know.
We've gone through public hearings. That's the appropriate time to voice a concern so that everybody, it's on the public record. That is the time. Otherwise, it's an email sent to Jeff. We don't see it necessarily. And so the process has been established already through zoning law, that those comments are transmitted via public hearing. And we've had numerous public hearings on it, and we have received that information, and we've processed it. And we reflect back to the applicant as representatives of our community, their community interests. If they have not addressed something to your satisfaction, then you tell them what it is, and you define what it is that will satisfy you. And there's 6 of us up here.
Well, that's great.
And I don't think they're going to satisfy all 6 of us. Probably not in each and every item. But to say that you've not addressed certain comments and not be able to identify what those comments are is unfair and inappropriate. And to repeatedly sit there and say that you don't have time or you haven't taken time is really frustrating.
Well, Commissioner Fiocco, we have a rule that you engineered, the 5 and 15 rule. It essentially gives us no urgency on this matter. That relieves us of any sense of urgency on resolving this matter. We should be able to take the time that this board needs to have satisfaction and confidence in unanimity, with consensus, that we can look every citizen in the face and say, we did everything we could, and we got the best product we could. Because Chatham Park has what it needs to build, what they need to build, before we finish this work.
And I my request would be that for something that is of this magnitude, that it delivered to us at least a week before the agenda, because we don't have enough, before we spend time on these things. I don't want to just read it, I want to study on it, I want to think about it, I want to talk to other people about certain things. That's what my request is, that for things like this that require time, that we have more than 3 days to review this. Because we do have everything.
And that's reasonable.
That's all I'm asking.
But and that's reasonable. But my focus is still on these questions that you're saying that they're not answering properly or not receiving responding to. What you're saying, I understand that. That's reasonable. Because sometimes, it does take time to review and research certain things. But I want to also know about these questions that they're not being answered properly. That's my concern as well. So I think that if anyone are posing questions, then they need to pose those not just to us, but they need to pose those to our planner and to our town manager, to our town attorney, because it's time to go on and get those things answered by Chatham Park. And the only way they can answer, just as Commissioner Fiocco stated, is if they have those questions. They can't answer them without those questions. They can't answer something they don't know.
I agree.
So if we get something, when we get a day before we step in here, they don't have it, so they can't review it. So that's what
I'm wondering if there are any of the items that we could move on this evening. I don't know if I know that there's some that require, I think that my impression is there needs to be more questions than others.
Yes, of these 4, I feel strongly that development phasing should be tabled until we have completed, to our satisfaction, public facilities. I could make a decision on parking and loading tonight. I wish that I could have more time with it.
It's a pleasure for, having been out of the meetings for the last month, I must admit speaking to a little bit of ignorance, but the work session that was held, I don't have a clear feeling of whether this same sense of frustration was at that meeting, or whether there was progress, or whether is it possible to just encapsulate and describe to me whether progress was made at that work session, or would it be helpful to have another one? In which,
well, I think at the work session, that's where these questions, the responses are here. That's where it came from, the work session. So that's where Chatham Park was responding specifically to questions which were asked on that.
And those were primarily your questions.
Right.
Right.
I think there were questions from everyone.
But there were, okay.
But predominantly, they were from Commissioner Carnes.
Mine were the only written concerns. And on some items, there was significant back and forth.
Would the board like to then tackle the parking and loading section, and then after consideration of that, then go, we're at 9:30 roughly.
Well, let's, I've got 2 questions on phasing. And I'll say that of the 4 or 5 comments and questions that I have on phasing, they're addressed. To my satisfaction. Question I have, it could be Jeff, it could be Chatham Park, but the phasing element, it seemed an earlier version of it And maybe I just put these documents together with a flip and they don't go together. But I thought they had the flow charts.
Yeah, they will have flow charts. They weren't incorporated in the copy that was sent to me, but those flow charts,
They're supposed to be part of it.
Yeah, they'll be still there.
Other question that I have is in the definition of infrastructure. It says infrastructure includes public infrastructure and improvements and facilities for any or of. And I think or is probably not supposed to be there. And if it is, then I'm searching for meaning because I don't understand that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
We didn't hear all of that, Commissioner Fairco. Ken Engel here from Chapman Park. If you could repeat that.
Yeah, I'm reading from the definition of infrastructure, the very last item on the last page.
Yes.
Infrastructure.
It should have the word all in there. It's just inadvertently omitted. Any or all.
Or all.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Got it.
Yes. And just like up in the first line of the public infrastructure definition,
or any,
or
yes.
all. That is just an inadvertent omission.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you've explained in here how this phasing works with the development agreement and how it works with the master public facilities plan and the transit plan. So that does satisfy my concerns, and I am prepared to act on that.
Commissioner, what you said that you would like, that you have the case in the table, the phasing of how we approve the public facilities.
Yes. One of the greatest concerns that I've read about the additional element for development phasing is that it is not specific enough to the town's commitments and obligations, and those public facilities. And public facilities is still in the works, it's still in the process. So, given the expertise and knowledge of this particular commenter, I greatly defer that opinion that this is an easy thing to do. We just simply table it until we can get satisfaction on public facilities.
I'm satisfied that the phasing is adequate and that we have other tools. It is the master public facilities plan and the development agreement that is the more appropriate tool to talk about milestones and how infrastructure and when infrastructure is built and who funds that construction and what those mechanisms are. So I think this phasing plan is adequate. There's not much more you can say other than making it a completely detailed document which will not survive market conditions in the future. It will not. And I know that we've heard discussions tonight about how the small area plans have to be exact and specific, and it's impossible. It will not happen. There are general ideas and there are concepts. And as we move from a higher elevation to a more specific, from a very general to a very specific, that's the way it's going to work. And along the way, things are going to change and we will react. And they will react. That's the way it's going to be. And that's the way our community works today. We've got a zoning ordinance. We've got a subdivision ordinance. Those things are of the same caliber of document in that they are very lasting documents. And they are also pliable documents. And that's what this is as well.
Discussion?
Me, here, the budget report, but sometimes they, if they have to be, I respect those of you, if you make more information about this. Then you have time to consult, about them in the private program,
We have had considerable assistance from planning board, from planning staff, and from the additional elements advisory committee.
So how would it impact the, I mean, you guys, the board is to wait until we do the public facility element, how would that impact Channel Park if we just waited? I can't use it more down the road.
And you asked Jeff Jones that question?
Mr. Jones or Mr. Griesbeck, when do you anticipate that this board would be passed in a similar package as tonight with the public facilities?
That was the one, you heard the recommendations from the committee tonight on public facilities. Would hope that we would go quicker and not be at this point 5 months from now as we are with the first set. 6 months from now. But it could be, I mean, if you're gauging the first set on, I guess, last set, 6 months, late out at the outset, but those elements are going to be, they could be difficult to get through. If these were taken for a reason, would be the first, because the committee, and I agree that these were sort of the ones that we could get our feet wet on and kind of go through and get these process and the work of the committee started. I have no idea. We haven't set a public hearing for the last set. We need to get through at least the first set before we start thinking about those.
Each set goes from public hearing to planning board?
That's correct.
And then the planning board, after that,
makes a recommendation and goes back to you.
And then presumably it goes back to John Park. Changes need to be made.
Yeah. So the way it's been happening is they've received recommendations from the committee. In the past, what we've done is once the committee was here making their recommendations, we pretty much set the public hearing for those elements that same night for the following meeting or one thereafter. We hold the public hearing. Town Park was here, comments made at the public hearing either by the public and or you all. That would include staff comments back as well. They would then go and make revisions to the element and have a revised element in front of the planning board. The planning board would then be able to take all the comments that were there and the responses. Town Park has been responding very similar as the ones that we had in the workshop. And we would go over those with the planning board. Planning board would be able to say yes or no to those, have questions for either staff or Town Park. They would make a recommendation, then it would come back to you all. And however long it takes here.
What is your view about waiting until public facilities element is approved? And what would be the impact on Chapel Park?
I really wouldn't be in a position to be able to tell you what an impact on Chapel Park would be. That might be an appropriate question. Anything beyond that is very subjective to the market and what's happening in the world 20 years from now. So those are things that the safety plan spells out. Things that we're doing now that would occur whether this is approved or not is sort of the approval process, the flow charts that would be included in this element. Right now, Chatham Park is currently doing a development review committee. We meet, go over plan, and the process, the flow chart that seems to be working would be incorporated into your phasing plan as a way of demonstrating how development will be approved through the process. Since we've been talking about the flow chart, we've come up with some good ideas on how signage would be addressed, because that comes up in the signage element, how signage that might not conform to everybody's liking will still come to you all. Remember, there was a provision in the first original draft that signage in commercial areas and that those would be exempt from town review. Through the process, we've got Chatham Park to agree that no, or not to agree, but to come back and say, that wasn't our intent. We're going to have you all and staff be able to weigh in on that type of signage. That's incorporated now into the flow chart process. Those are things that if phasing was approved, that would be just how it is, and those would be incorporated into day-to-day business. Not to say that that's not going to occur if you don't approve those tonight.
Sometimes some of these just have a few sticking points. Maybe we just need to address the ones that maybe
Which ones does the board believe are more mechanical in nature and might be easier to approach? Shall we go to parking and loading then?
Parking and loading, I'm happy to work on this.
Chuck Smith. I think we have to use it because if you know whatever your sticking point is, you're not gonna know what it is unless you ask. Yeah.
I want to address if there are questions or comments on the phasing. If you wait for the public facilities element to review that, you're not going to be any happier with the detail in that. What we have said in the previous responses from about a month ago is the detail you're looking for is in the small area plan. We've had that information, and the detail is in there. And what we said at the presentation to the committee was that we can't give, the element covers all of Chatham Park. We can't give you detail for something 30 years from now. And Mr. Fiocca has already explained briefly that market changes, there are technology changes, there are all kinds of things that change. We would tell you something that would not be correct for 30 years out. What we said in the element was that we would give you information with each small area plan that would give you the detail. And so in the small area plan, you'll see we've given you an annual absorption schedule for residential units and for non-residential square footage. That's the information you need to be able to plan parks, to be able to plan water, sewer, all those public facility kind of issues that are talked about again in public facilities, but again, it's laying out the process to look into the small area plan. I'm assuming, since you haven't known that, to be able to understand that tonight, you haven't looked at that. And I'm going to say that we probably need to let you look at that to see if the detail is in there before you can vote on the public facilities on the phasing element. But I would hope that you would be able to do that within the next 2 weeks, just to see it's there. We're not trying to agree that if we say year one we're going to provide 120 houses that you, well, no, I wish it was 150 or I wish it was 100. That's not the point. The point is you're getting information to be able to plan.
So with schools, if you're relying on small area plans to get those numbers, I understand why you need to be flexible because who knows what's going to be going on.
Right.
This is really just a sincere question. I know in public schools, sometimes it takes years to get school going. So I guess my concern is if you're relying on those numbers as the small area plans come in, how will the schools be prepared and how will that kind of thing?
Sure, that's a great question. And we have a couple things. We've committed to the school system to meet with them quarterly, and we've been doing that. Not only, we're giving you projections with the small area plan that looks out 20 years, but we're also turning in development plans, and real numbers would be happening quarter by quarter, year by year, that they can look at real numbers and say, we see that we need to be planning for the next school. We're not getting into the addressing public facilities, but the comment tonight was, why are we not offering more than 11 sites if we need more than 11 sites? What we've been working with the school system on is that we have said we're going to provide a seat for every student that lives in Chatham Park and not tie it to numbers of schools. If that becomes 3 schools or 103 schools to get every kid into a seat into a school, then we're going to be doing that. We know, though, that when we use their consultant to look at our population projections, they're the ones that put those in the computer and come up with a number of students that results in a number of schools. And so with a maximum number of units that we would have in Chatham Park, you get to a maximum number. There was concern that we could, okay, well, what happens if you have 11 private school sites? Then there's nothing for the public students. And that's why we've gone back to seats. If we chose to give away 11 private school sites, that will not seat every student in Chatham Park. And so we've still said, public schools, you will get school sites for these other students that still don't have a seat in the school. So we're working through that language with them. But the main thing, at least from a phasing standpoint, is that we've given you a process that lays out the detail to get to those preliminary conversations. So they can, and we've also in the small area plan, with those projections, we get to a point where in there we say, in the year 2025, we think you'll need an elementary school. There's no certainty on that. But we're working with them quarterly so that we're both looking at that information together to decide, that's what's going to happen. And we have your point about the number of years it takes. That's been their concern too. So we have been going through that language to make sure, because we also we've had certain private schools that have wanted to come in, purchase a site with no commitment to ever build on the site. We can't have that because they may never put something there. And so we're still working through that sort of dialogue with the school system, that when we identify a site, that they have, once we've got roads to it, once we've got water and sewer to it, and once they start looking at it seriously, then there's a timeline that they would have to make a decision on that. But I think if you talk to them, and you will, you'll see that I think we're covering that appropriately.
I appreciate that you submitted the small area plan, but I'm really treating that, and I have looked at a fair amount of it, that it provides me comfort in knowing what some of the detailed plans are. But at the same time, it is the additional elements that will inform whether or not that small area plan conforms to the additional elements. So in my mind, phasing is not necessarily reliant. The phasing element is not reliant on the small area plan, because that small area plan better meet this phasing element. And the fact that you've provided it to us allows us to get a glimpse into the future information time, I don't need it to approve this. I don't need it.
I think when I said that, most of that just so you know when the element says we're going to do something, and you've now got one small area plan to, it is providing that information.
Right.
It's really.
And that's what I guess I was trying to say. Being comfortable by that information, but not relying on it to.
It's one tool that you have to make the decisions you have to make.
We just follow up on what Commissioner Bowley was talking about school. Now, we had this report tonight which indicates about Bailey's Academy picking up 3 sites. What about that?
That's why I said earlier, with the school system, we've been getting away from, the intent is not to say, okay, we're going to have 11 sites, we just did 3 of them, we only have 8 left. But if that school houses, and I think the projections are something like 950 students, and 600 of them are Chatham Park students. What we've said in our projections is the number in the public facilities element identifies 7,610 students. That would be, if you go to the maximum number of units being built out in Chatham Park, we would need to provide seats for 7,610 students.
So you're looking at.
So we're now looking at seats as opposed to total number of school sites.
So how would you track that? How would you track where students are going to school?
I have addresses for every student, and I know in other municipalities when we've been doing this, and I realize Mr. Jones is probably ready to fall out of his chair, but with all the things he's got to do, but as you go along, he gets more staff. You'll be tracked, and really schools are going to become much more of an issue when growth starts really kicking in. You're going to be tracking that sort of information just to make sure that there are adequate number of schools out there. And you'll be doing that. School will be doing that. We'll be doing that with school administration. I know, in other municipalities that really has had high levels of growth. Whenever we're turning in a subdivision plan, we're having to show that this number of lots will generate this number of elementary school students, middle school students, high school students. And that information is before the lots are even in place. And that's going to the school system, and all this is being tracked before homes are built and throughout. And it will just continue, not only with us, but other parts of Pittsburgh, and be growing as growth comes here. So it'll be tracked throughout your town.
Continually, you've represented the concept of adequate facilities and planning for them and predicting school populations and normal calculus that is done in planning. And it is part of the determining factor in adequacy and saying, this particular project is going to tip the balance to where it really shouldn't occur until another facility has come online, like another water system, another sewer system, another roadway system. Schools are similar in that you're predicting the demand and trying to stay ahead.
You're doing that with your sewer right now. I mean, you're down towards the end of the system, and you're really tracking that pretty closely, just to make sure that you're making responsible decisions.
Capacity or not to a project.
Superintendent Jordan and the school board, you're working with them on all of that.
We meet regularly with Superintendent Jordan and with Chris Blyce. That's who we've been working. And then at the point where they are satisfied with the language, and Chris came and spoke to the Public Facilities Committee. So we've been in fairly regular communication with them. We're already working on revising the language for the public facilities element that deals with schools, because we're trying to stay ahead of these things, because we know the school board, as Foley said, you just don't walk in there one day, give them a piece of information, and tomorrow they come back and say, okay, we're happy, and here it is. They have a process to follow.
Absolutely.
And we're trying to stay ahead of that with them.
Right, because I know how they were plugging in those numbers and all that.
I have another question about the phasing. Ms. Collington had a concern that Objective 3, infrastructure is not required to be buffered from existing uses, only planned future uses, that it shouldn't be both. And I think that's an interesting question.
let's see where we are. Objective.
That, I can read it if you like. Provide for public infrastructure that is properly designed, constructed, screened, and buffered in order to mitigate visual impact on adjacent planned development of a different use or nature.
And so what is the concern?
Infrastructure not required to be buffered from existing uses only planned future.
Well, I think that's, let's look at what actually happens when for any public infrastructure to be put in place. It's going to be part of a development plan. Every development plan is going to come for you to approve. So if you don't think something has been appropriately buffered, whether existing, past, present, whatever, you're going to the staff will make that comment, planning board will make that comment. The adjacent property owner, someone is going to give a comment that we're going to have to address. And so I think, basically what that objective is saying is that when public, this covers water, sewer, schools, roadways, things like that, that there is a process to understand what the impacts are, and then there are systems in place within the other elements to mitigate those impacts.
Also saying that the goal is to properly buffer these items from existing development and or known planned development. I don't know that there's another category.
Yeah, I'm trying to answer this without really knowing what the concern is, but I do think that it states that it's going to be it should be properly designed, constructed, screened, and buffered.
Are there further questions on the development phase?
Thank you.
Board ready for action, so forth?
Motion to approve the development phase. And as amended.
Motion made by Michael Fiocco.
Request discussion.
Discussion further on the base second. Seconded.
Well, Mr. Smith was kind enough to say he could imagine 2 weeks to allow greater, closer consideration of the development phasing element. I would like to take him up on that. I think Commissioner Fuller, would that help you get a greater sense of confidence to study it to your satisfaction? With phasing? To move tonight.
Further discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor of the resolution, which is attached to our red line document, resolution approving the additional elements on the phasing plan. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Opposed.
The motion carries 3-1. Are there additional elements that might be taken up at this time, or is there a possibility of taking a break at some point? What is the pleasure of the board? item in our package is signage.
I suggest that we go to parking and loading, because that was one that we felt like would be solid.
Section 5 is parking and loading. And we have a number of red line changes that have been made. Chuck, do you want to give any overall description of the parking and loading changes that have been made?
Yes, ma'am. When you look at the majority of the changes that are tracked in here, they deal with bicycle parking. And primarily Mr. Bonas' comments, I think the changes in here reflect our responses to that, and we were basically increasing the amount of bicycle parking, mainly to ensure that there would be a minimum. We did say that bed and breakfast was inadvertently left out. We changed it, and there were certain things that fell behind that accordingly. And so most of in table 1, most of those changes are occurring in that by column.
And I'll admit that when I saw all the strikers, the minimum of 2 gave me
that was a test.
until I got to the footnote.
To the footnote, right? To see if the note covered what was going. We eliminated those words that covered it with the note at the end.
So to confirm my understanding, there is a requirement for a bike parking space that will equal 4 parking spaces for the bike.
You're saying if there's a requirement for 4, you could delete 4 vehicular spaces. Is that what you're saying?
There's a requirement for a single.
Oh, for one, you will have a bike rack that parks 4. That's right. Okay. So I think again that was in. We get the issue. I think we do. And I'll say we're trying to listen on that.
Are there any further questions on parking and loading?
Yes. Tell me again how waste removal, allocation of space is not a loading issue.
What we have to do is, what you have been addressing, at least in the conversations I've heard this evening, is really the number of dumpsters. That's the way I reduce it down to that. So we have to access, if we've got 1 dumpster or 50 dumpsters, and if the town requires, we want you to have 50 different dumpsters, then within our part, we have to access those. But with the parking and loading would not get into, we're going to require 50 different dumpsters. That is not a parking issue. Now, the narrative that we get into is this: if we have 50 dumpsters, we've got to screen those. We've said we're putting walls around those and we're planting around those. So we're trying to trying to mitigate the impact of that. But waste removal is not a parking and loading issue. Access to the waste removal is.
Yes, and it is discussed as access to the waste removal, isn't it? And I don't remember actually whether dumpsters were. I think the word dumpsters does not appear, but waste removal is explicitly discussed. Correct.
I don't understand your question. Dumpsters are
in parking and loading. I don't remember because I read these things electronically. I'm looking for keywords, and I think in one section I didn't find dumpster. I was surprised. I thought I would find it. Or waste removal. What was the language in parking and loading? And let's start from there.
Okay.
Having had the unique privilege of actually driving the trucks that empty those dumpsters, I can tell you that is a loading and access problem. And it definitely needs to be considered. In my opinion,
I mean, I know accessing those is a loading issue.
So if you add a third one for food waste, then you're going to need to consider that.
Okay, going back to what we talked about earlier, we will be turning in development plans that show every parking space, every dumpster, and if today we're requiring two, we have to show how we access that. If next year you decide that everyone's going to separate food from the rest of the garbage, that'll become something that we have to do. And then you will be checking site plans to see that there are dumpsters to handle food, and that we have accessed those dumpsters. You get to approve every site plan that shows that.
I appreciate that. Mr. Smith, I'm not quite sure how to approach this. It's this kind of resistance that leads to my distrust. Let me just be honest. Because it seems a fairly straightforward request. Let's think about the 21st century. In the 21st century, we're no longer building in ways that are wasteful and conducive to profligate waste. We're thinking about recycling from the beginning. We're thinking about waste reduction from the beginning. Your company has claimed that you're sustainability minded. Well, let's go there. Let's embrace that. And let's embrace the fact that this county has 2 commercial food waste composting facilities. They are eager for material from the developments that you'll be building. So let's incorporate phasing and parking and loading for a third dumpster. Simple as that. And then address it as enclosures and brick and screen as you wish in the landscaping element.
And 5 years from now, when you add the 4th dumpster, do we have to come back and change it?
Mr. Smith.
I'm being serious. These things change. I mean, what we have to do is access any dumpster we've got. And I'm not. That is not being disingenuous.
I have some reassurance from you that you'll incorporate it in a future.
You get to review the site. You get to vote for the thing.
I would like to see it as an element, sir. It is an element level concern.
I have never, in over 30 years of dealing with parking and loading and dumpsters, seen it be a parking and loading issue.
Well, if it's not in parking and loading, can I please have some reassurance that we'll deal with this later on down the line?
Well,
I've already submitted comments for the UDO process.
I'll say this.
Let's go back to the whole, if the whole town of Pittsboro thing doesn't do it, because in my opinion, the whole town of Pittsboro will do this.
Well, the town of Pittsboro, municipalities are responsible for picking up waste. Now, right now, you choose to contract that out to someone else. I believe at some point in the future, you will have your own capabilities of doing that within the town. That's may not be true, but I think that would take place. I've never had a subdivision, a project that was responsible for picking up garbage. It's a town responsibility, just like water and sewer is a town responsibility, just like schools are the county's responsibility. These are municipal responsibilities.
And I didn't say that it needs to be in subdivision.
Well, in this development project. But you could get into saying that each individual residence has to put out a separate garbage can for food waste as opposed to.
But the development is responsible for providing the facilities for that removal of the waste.
Yeah, I mean that's a public facilities issue, not a parking and loading issue. If you choose right now, when the master plan was approved, 12 issues were identified that needed to be covered under public facilities. Waste removal was not one of them. And so
it's in landscaping.
No, the screening of waste of the dumpster is in landscaping. The screening of it, the visual impact, mitigating that impact.
There's nothing in parking and loading that describes the number of dumpsters required.
No.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't say that. Right. It doesn't say one is required. I mean,
no,
but
the town's
Well, that's
And
what
you
I
have to
think.
follow the town's requirements.
That's
And you're not
what I'm
really
accustomed to.
This would be where the town would have say in development in Town Park, beyond the element.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
If we pass an ordinance that says every business has to have 3 dumpsters, 1 carrying good waste, recycling, and refuge, that's the ordinance of the town. That applies to Chatham Park or new businesses downtown or in 15501 or out on the bypass. That's town-wide. What we have to set up is how do they access those dumpsters if required? And then in screening and landscaping, is how are those corrals going to look when we require them? Not only in Chatham Park and townwide. Those are issues that, rightly so, come up in the UDO discussion process. And as much as we want UDO to be able to influence the town and Chatham Park, this is an example of how the UDO will be applicable to development in Chatham Park. So you're not having to come back and try to force something in the Chatham Park. They're part of the town. We run an ordinance for the town that says you got to have 3 dumpsters. That carries everywhere, not just Chatham Park.
Thank you, Jeff. That's very reassuring.
Yeah. I think that's the way it should work.
Are there further questions from the board on parking and lighting? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed. The motion carries. Is there another section? This was approving the resolution that was approved that is in our package.
Yes.
We have signage and we have lights. And we have the possibility for a break.
Take a break. Seconded.
Does the same thing, yeah.
Where's your vest? I was with Sheriff. Before the rooster crows 3 times. I'm just using biblical reference. Mr. Paul. I don't need a yellow streamer or something. Yeah, but then we don't know if get to let you defend us in civil.
We need a motion to go back to session. Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Jeff Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed. We have 2 sections left, signage and lighting. And are there questions on let's take signage first, if we might. Are there questions specific to the changes that have been made on signage? I see the off-premises location sign permit that's been added on page 2. Actually, I believe the rest of the signage section is as it previously has been through our study and through the public hearing. Except that the number of flagpoles has been changed on page 9. There are some changes about nonprofit signs on page 6 as well. Are there any questions on the signage section? Is there a motion?
Oh, I do have questions. I'm just trying to get brief.
Oh, sure. Okay.
It's a lot to juggle, folks.
On page 27, series signs, there is a figure missing. It says a series of 2 or more signs along a public or private road, 2 of which are less than blank feet apart. Was so that's missing information.
I think that came from the original.
From the markup. Maybe it's. I went to the markup.
What page?
Yeah. The markup, page 27. It is on page 30. So it is blank as well.
No,
So we're missing information there. And I think I've got the same comment where it had said ordinance instead of element, and it says ordinance again.
What page?
Yeah, what page? You got authority on that.
Hey, Mark. You know what? I think that's sorry. Dave. There are a couple of places. 5C. So I thought I had a markup and then a clean version. It seems as though I've got 2 different markups. Different markups.
Most recently, we gave a clean and a new clean and a new markup. So I'm not sure what. And the new markup just dealt with the changes related to the work session.
Yeah, that's how I thought you go for. Well, in 5B, well, imply to C.
Temporary signage for profit.
Yeah, there's some brackets that says the time periods here are just jumping off that.
Page 19.
Yeah. So
That's understood. Should have been deleted.
No, it's
The time period here.
Yeah.
It's the bracketed sentence.
It's the last sentence of that paragraph. We just didn't catch that.
There's another one, same thing in D.
Is it D? I can find it.
So the bracket is stuck to surplus.
And there's another one in E.
John Thomas is saying that he believes that we need a little more review on this, and if we're fixing typographical errors, that we need perhaps our concentration and that of others may not be as great right now. Is that board company? It is.
I personally don't mind if you take this one in, lighting.
I think lighting is probably the most, has the most questions. So, how does the board feel about moving on to the next agenda item and reserving signage and lighting for the next meeting?
So moved.
Moved by John Bonnet.
Do we have additional questions on these items? Or we're not? I mean, okay.
Do you have additional questions?
Sure. Yeah.
We want to do the questions and then allow.
Other than typographical or other misleading,
I have one very minor additional question on signage. And it has to do with let's see, I don't know what number it is, but it's 5. This is 5A. Those numbers?
24 on the markup. What does it say?
You know what, computer?
No, it says for Windows signage. Okay, the one above it.
Yeah.
5K.
So, pardon me, but what is the show window glass?
That's page 21.
On 124.
Well, I'm going to give you.
Is that a technical term?
No, I think it's more of a kind of a colloquial. But if you're obviously in an auto dealership, where you've got a window in someone's office, that's not the show window. The show window would have the car behind it, and so whether it's a furniture store or where you're showing something like that, as opposed to the window or the window in the office or the storage room or something like that. I mean, it's distinguishing between those kind of retail windows versus more. You don't like that word?
No, it didn't make sense to me. I mean,
Does it not? Does it still not?
No.
That's the best I can do. And then back to the blank in series. The series sign itself is prohibited. Well, it's not irrelevant because if you set the distance if the sign itself, let's say a sign is 5 feet apart from each other, that's prohibited if you set 6 in that blank. And so you're going to set some number in there that is allowed. If it's less than that, then it's a series sign is not allowed. So like the Vermicelli, I'm dating myself here, but Vermicelli signs, that sort of thing. And those things, have a distance that you could say we don't want Vermicelli signs in town or that type of thing. And so we would set a distance that reflected that. But I'm open to your thoughts on that.
I mean, like fast food restaurants, they will have big giant stickers on a lot of the windows. And that's interesting. That seems like that would be different for both sides.
But it's got to go through a process for you to approve it.
I think your standard was that combined with all the other signs couldn't be more than 25%.
How about 100 feet for series signs?
I don't know.
Where I have seen those most recently are church barbecues. They have a series of signs, 8 or 10 signs leading up to the church, starting a mile from the church, place those out.
Did you do that to a church?
No, I mean, that's probably 100 feet.
Okay. So anyway, I guess we're suggesting 100. You can decide if that's appropriate or not.
Do you have other questions on this section, or would you like to defer those to?
I really want to have my questions organized.
Where are we on the motion? I can't remember. I made a motion to delay until the next meeting.
Next meeting. Lighting and signage.
Lighting and signage. Was there a second?
I'll second it.
Pamela Baldwin, second. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Aye. 3-1, the motion carries. We are now then at new business. John Bonnet has provided us with a memo regarding his interest in proceeding to discuss affordable housing being on concrete wet. And John, do you want to present?
Absolutely. So, in speaking with Commissioner Baldwin, I've heard the concern that affordable housing is so massive and so complex that we can't possibly get to it, do anything about it. Maybe that wasn't your exact word, but that it's big and it's going to take a lot of time. And I agree that it will take a lot of time, but I think that we as a town and as a town board can take early action in a limited way, which does a couple of things. We can make a statement in this year's budget about our commitment to affordable housing. Perhaps it's just a first step. Maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 5%. But a statement dedicating a fraction of our annual budget to an affordable housing reserve fund. The purpose of that fund would be decided by a date certain in the future. And so we would set for ourselves the work of figuring out the complexities of that policy and how those funds are to be appropriated, used, spent. And the second item that we can do is we as a board can agree that we want to ask Chatham Park to make a commitment. As the largest developer that's occupying so much of our time and energies right now, I think it's appropriate for us to ask that they build a specific number of units of market rate workforce housing over some time period within a given price range that is clearly currently missing from town. In speaking with realtors, there's nothing in the $100,000 range really, certainly new, and very, very little at the $200,000 to $250,000 range. And those houses, when they do come available, are often sold in the first day or bid up worse. Multiple bids placed on the same house. So there's clearly a need for this. I imagine that the Chatham Park is clearly planning to meet that need. And we just need to encourage them to make a commitment that perhaps maybe it's a little bit out of their comfort zone, but if they know that we're taking action, I think that they ought to be willing to discuss taking action similarly in the market range. I'm not talking about subsidized housing. So that's the second item. And then the third item is that we would recognize and acknowledge that number one and number two are incomplete solutions. They're definitely just a step. And we will begin a process of developing a complex and comprehensive affordable housing policy to be amended into our Unified Development Ordinance. I think we can agree at this point to stipulate what that process should address, rather like the county's committee has addressed in a very limited fashion only affordable rentals. We can stipulate at the outset that we're going to address affordable rentals, we're going to address subsidized housing, we're going to address emergency housing, existing housing stock and the problems there, perhaps even extending into the concept of affordable living, which would reach into the energy efficiency and water efficiency and indoor air quality. That's also an opportunity for us to set for ourselves the goal of working on long-term stability. We heard Mr. Noss talking about some of those concepts tonight about how other municipalities have structured contracts that their land trust, when it makes an investment for affordable housing from public funds, that it has stipulations on, I think it's on the deed of the house, that it can't be sold for a certain profit, above a certain profit margin. Whatever, those are questions that will require a lot more work, clearly. But it doesn't require a year's worth of work, or a month's worth of work, for us to make a financial commitment of some level, and for us to begin negotiating with Chatham Park to ask them to make a commitment as well. That is the high-level message that I want to deliver tonight. I'm not asking that we vote on this tonight, but I do want to hear your thoughts, your feedback, and there we go.
I'll start. In reference to that, that's understandable, but I think we need to hear from Triangle J with all those different things that we talked about in our last meeting. For example, Chapel Hill has a housing trust fund. Orange County has that. And they have affordable housing development reserve. That's just some of the things we talked about. In addition to that, Orange County has a bond, which they just started, in reference to affordable housing. But they have a nonprofit agency that oversees that. So before we can go and look at, doing certain things, I think we need to get a presentation about several different options, because in this particular case, as I said, Orange County is doing that, but probably in conjunction with some of the municipalities as well. So I'm going to be at a meeting Wednesday at Triangle J. I'm going to talk with them more about this. But basically, there needs to be more information that we can gather from someone before we can even make a commitment such as that. And in reference to a percentage, we have to look at other variables if you're going to ask Chatham Park to commit to a percentage, because we don't know how many homes there are going to be. There's a lot of variables that you would have to look at to make that quite of them. And I don't know if we will have access to those particular variables. But I do think that we need to actually listen to what if we could schedule something with Triangle J for them to come, because they are doing, and also Chatham County is planning to have them on an ongoing basis as the affordable house, to look at the affordable housing and research it and report back to them as well. So they're contracted with them to do that. Now, in reference to the affordable housing policy of the fraction going to affordable housing reserve fund, I don't know if that would be something that we could do. I don't know if Mr. Ruth actually looked at the budget for doing that.
Yeah, I've looked at the budget a little bit last week. The budget that I'm going to hand out to you tonight does show a slight general fund transfer of $5,000 to $6,000. I can't say that. Yeah, I don't know where you originated $200,000 per year, but if you're trying to generate that amount per year, I'm very reluctant to be drawing on that from our reserves annually. I think you want some other form of revenue coming in that raises that money, whether it's some sort of general obligation, tax commitment, or an endowment, or a combination, sort of a cocktail of different funding sources. But for the town to take on $200,000 per year annually is not workable unless we make cuts in other areas.
Could be a haircut across everything, which would hurt.
We couldn't do it.
I think that the concept of creating a fund of some sort is a really good idea, and I think explore that about the rest of it. I think that's one of the really good work that figuring out how to do it. Finding out the best solution for us as a community.
Well, I agree that I think there will be a municipal contribution to the program.
Sure.
And I'm really encouraged that the county has stated pretty emphatically that they are on board. And I think between, with their help, I think we can develop a pretty good program. And so I recognize the spirit under which you've written this and agree. And one of the things I would like for us to do is not only perhaps Triangle J, but school government. There's a gentleman named Tyler Mulligan, who is an eminent expert on affordable housing. And I would love to hear him present to the board as well. Perhaps we can make arrangements. I think I tried to get him here, I don't know, about 6-8 months ago. He was tied up both solid, but I can reach out to him again. Maybe Brian could try to snag him as well. But yeah, I think it's a critical item for the health of our community, and it requires to be done as best we can.
I think though too, raising that revenue, I think is contribution from the town is going to be critical in some way, and the contribution from the town combined with other resources is going to be very powerful. But I think even more important is we got to decide whether or not how we're going to spend whatever amount of money we come up with. To just say we're going to come up with X amount of money without having an idea of what it's going to be spent on isn't the best use of public funds. When I've got other things I can spend a lot of money on as well. So, whatever planning, and I think Commissioner Baldwin is kind of getting at this, I think whatever planning that is currently underway, we're going to be well served to do that and then some. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm at that time, but raising the revenue, fine, but let's have some place to spend it as opposed to just stockpiling fund balance.
Let me clarify, because perhaps I wasn't clear, but I agree. I don't think we should allocate or appropriate that money until we know what we're doing with it. Until we have a program. But I look at it in a lot of different ways, and I think there's no getting around town making a contribution to that program. That will be a feature of the program. But no, I'm not prepared to allocate funds at this critical time. We've got a lot of things we have to do. But it is a high priority for us to work on this program. Try to get all of them comfortable.
memorandum.
No. So, yeah, it's clearly just a what's the word? So one of my first jobs, I had a boss who said, "Have you ever heard of rock style of management?" And that is the idea that you bring your boss a rock, and he said, "No, I wanted this kind of rock." And it's an iterative process, and you continue the conversation. So I brought a rock, and I'm hearing that there's an emerging consensus that allocating funds into a reserve, allocating monies into a reserve fund without knowing what that's to be spent on is not something that we currently have an appetite to do. But I will challenge you to say how else would we demonstrate to Chatham Park and any other developers that we have skin in the game.
You tell them you have skin in the game. We control that. You have to let them know that that's what we expect from them. We tell them. And we have told them. In fact. Yeah. And we are consistently working with the county and, as I said, municipalities, because they're serious about it. And from what we look at a lot of things in those meetings, and we have a serious need, not just for homes to purchase, but rental homes as well. So, and that everyone knows it, and we are definitely going to do something about it. So, but we have to have a process. I understand the process will take years. But I think if we can get all of the information, get it presented to us, and then go forward with that. Because, as I said, there are those that join the land trust, the bonds, and Commissioner Fiocco, it was one of you had someone to present to us about the land trust. Yeah.
Robert Allen.
Yes. So he presented, and he can present again.
He's done a lot of great. I think he's going to present to the county for a couple of years.
Yeah, he's presented Chatham Park as well. And that may be one tool in our kit. I don't think that's going to be the only tool. From my own perspective, it seems like it's got limited penetration, meaning that it's not been able to produce a whole lot of value. And I think he admitted as much, that there's only been a few hundred units. 260 units. And is that Chapel Hill or Orange County?
Mostly, I think he gets a lot from the Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
But it's not only in Chapel Hill, it's throughout Orange County.
Yeah. So I'm getting the sense that we could soak that up in a year, that there's that much need when I speak to realtors. And I'm still trying to poll realtors, real estate agents on this subject. Let me go back to the fund again, fully recognizing that the idea of a haircut across all budget sectors is not something we want to stomach right now. But to the question of percentages, the town of Chapel Hill, their recent proceedings, it's come to light in an article that 4% is the number that they have currently in their budget. I'm sure that they have revenue sources that are generating those funds specific for affordable housing purposes, but of their overall budget, 4% is spent on affordable housing. And the whole point of this one article was that there was one commissioner who felt very strongly, and there was the implications, there was a consensus that that's inadequate. The city of Raleigh, on the other hand, is approximately 1%. There was an article similarly on Durham. I wasn't able to get the numbers, but Triangle J Council of Governments is working on this. I'm told that they're polling local governments and trying to get these data. I'm not saying that town of Pittsburgh is comparable to either Raleigh or Chapel Hill, We're a unique community, but I do think that we ought to think about that kind of comparison, not as benchmarks, but as just something to keep in mind. I hear that we're going to do outreach. Commissioner Baldwin to Triangle J Council of Government. We're going to ask them to present in July.
If that's the time we want.
Their work is going to be done in July?
Ours will, in terms of rental housing,
yes,
completed in July.
Okay.
Because the county, the county housing is for renters. But the Triangle J can come because they just come to present to us.
Well, Mr. Fioco, do you think you might have someone, your expert?
Yeah, I'll reach out to them and see what's available.
That sounds great to me.
Being summertime, you may.
Want to see action?
That's showing due diligence.
Thank you.
So our final agenda item is manager's update. Brian Russo.
You have the memo. The only other thing I'd add is we did manage to finalize, I believe, a date to workshop the reclamation facility discussion, and if we can get together our financial guarantee agreement that same evening, that would be great. If you want to mark down in your calendars, May 31st, which is a Wednesday at 6:30, and that was based on the information that Allison was able to get from you guys, so I appreciate the quick feedback on that. That's the date also Tim Baldwin can make work. And so we'll just plan on that. We'll get an announcement out as soon as we can. And hopefully get some materials by the end of the week and get those out to you as well. So that's all I'm going to say right at the moment. If you guys have any questions on that.
I do have one question on your update item 115-501 widening. Town share is estimated $340,000, $330,000. Can Powellville funds be used to meet our town obligations? Just wondering where those funds will be coming from.
Yeah, it's possible we could use Powellville for that if they let us. The problem with Powellville is if we get roughly $80,000 to $90,000 per year from Powellville, we're going to pretty much spend all of our balance on that this year into just repaving. By the time this rolls around, will we have enough built up with, against some of the other paving maintenance projects that we'll have? Probably not.
So that means project might need to be deferred.
We'll need either to borrow for that amount, or we'll need to raise revenue in some other way. So, and this was the board's stated preference at the time to have bicycle lanes on both sides and sidewalks on both sides, which I guess is, if you're going to do, it fits within our pedestrian plan, and if you're going to do it anywhere, this would probably be the place to do it. I think also, too, you have to weigh into account the amount of feedback that you're going to get from the public on this, and we look forward to having, I'm told, some sessions with DOT on this in August or September. So we need to be a little bit of work on that to kind of really visualize where some of these facilities are going to go, because obviously bicycle lanes and sidewalks will increase the impact of what's there right now, which is not a lot.
Right.
Mayor Perry, building on our conversation with Larry Cheek yesterday, I think this would be a perfect opportunity while the county goes into its final budget deliberations. That's what he was telling us, that they had made requests to share, John, and these kind of projects in Siler City. You should ask them if they'd be willing to share. As Brian's saying, finding other funding sources. We probably want to hear from you now than 8 months from now.
Who's they?
The county. The county might be willing to do something.
We have one on the location of our other two kiosks. I just was hoping, I just looked at the one that we've got up there already, and it's just so magnificent. Are there any other questions for Brian Bruce?
I don't have any questions, but the 15501 widening, we've been trying to get that done since I got on the board. So, and with sidewalks, that we proposed this way back in 2005.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy to see it. Very
Yes,
happy to see it.
very happy.
Yeah,
But I
we'll get that money somehow. I mean, it's just, and keep in mind, that's 20% of the overall cost. I mean, the state is providing us. Yeah.
Especially being on the Chatham Park cycling plan, and that makes it very down. That's really much.
I really hope we can do that in a way that's an amenity for those folks who live along that section of the street.
Commissioner concerns?
I've got one question. Brian, on the tree lights?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it looks great. Yeah, they're probably getting a little buried by some of the growth, but it looks good. But there are 2 trees north from Salisbury. Last time I checked, they weren't being lit.
Right. I don't know why that is.
Because I think the lights are still there now.
Yeah, I think we're going to go through the plan. The plan is to go through and trim. We're probably going to have to replace some lights annually. Like I said before, that's going to be sort of a regular cost with this. And we'll look to be, as opposed to trimming, I believe, once a year now, pretty much annually this year, we're going to be doing it twice a year. Just because it's important to make sure that those lights aren't getting buried the way they are now. LED, the nice thing is the LED lights don't burn out like the old school Christmas lights that we used to put up. So there's that. But yeah, it's I'm not really sure why those lights north of Salisbury aren't being lit, or why they're not being powered. So I'll find out.
Power them up.
Michael?
That would have qualified as a
No, thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Second. Moved by Michael Joseph, seconded by